Welcome to the Haunting Hour. Tonight, you'll hear a collection of real horror stories that are perfect for a dark, rainy night. These tales are unsettling, mysterious, and all claim to be true. Whether you're here to sleep or stay up with the lights on, settle in, relax, and listen closely. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know which one kept you up the longest. I grew up in a neighborhood that felt frozen in time. Just rows of modest homes, dry hedges, and cracked sidewalks. It was the kind of place where you could leave your front door open and nobody would steal anything, mostly because nobody had much to steal. I was 10 years old the summer everything changed. The summer I stopped riding my bike past the corner lot at the end of Birchwood Drive. Back then, my cousin Kyle would visit for a few weeks in July while his parents took long road trips. My mom worked mornings at the credit union, and my dad was usually at the auto shop. That left Kyle and me to do whatever we wanted, as long as we stayed nearby. We got this idea to set up a makeshift snack table at the end of the street. Not a full lemonade stand, just sodas, plastic bags of pretzels, and a few packs of gum. My mom said we could sell. There wasn't much traffic, but we'd wave at passing cars and pretend we were running a real business. The lot across the street from where we set up was just a dirt patch with gravel and some scrubby weeds, fenced in with sagging chain link. The for sale sign was bleached white from the sun. I never saw anyone there, not even workers or realtors. It just sat there, quiet and useless. On the third day of our little snack stand, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a gray station wagon pulled up across the road. The engine stayed running, the windows were up. We couldn't see the driver very well because of the glare on the windshield. The car didn't move, it just sat there for a long time. I remember Kyle nudging me and saying something like, "Maybe they want chips." I felt uneasy, but I waved anyway. Nothing happened. Then, after what felt like 2 or 3 minutes, the car crept forward and turned into the empty lot. The tires crunched over gravel as it rolled all the way to the back corner of the fenced area and stopped again. Nobody got out. We kept glancing at it while trying to look casual. Every so often, I'd pretend to rearrange the snacks or check the cooler just so I didn't have to look directly at the car. Eventually, the engine turned off. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I could hear birds again and the soft wind through the chain link, but that quiet made me hyper-aware of every tiny sound. There was no movement inside the car, just stillness. After about 10 minutes, Kyle got bored and walked down the block to see if a neighbor's dog was out. I stayed behind, mostly because I didn't want to leave the table unattended, but also because something about that station wagon gave me a feeling I couldn't shake. I was sitting on the cooler, drinking a can of grape soda, when I saw the driver's side door crack open. A man stepped out. He was wearing dark jeans and a faded green flannel. His posture was stiff, almost like he didn't know how to stand casually. I don't remember his face in detail, just that he had thinning hair and didn't look toward me even once. He opened the back of the wagon, reached in, and started adjusting something I couldn't see. Maybe tools, maybe boxes. I still don't know, but he was quiet. Too quiet. He didn't look around or take anything out. He just moved his arms like he was sorting something carefully. I felt the hair on my arms rise. I don't think I breathed at all while watching him. Then he stopped. His head turned slowly, not toward me, but toward the street. A second later, the passenger side door opened, and a woman got out. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt with some sports logo I didn't recognize. Her hair was tied back messily, but parts of it looked uneven, like it had been cut in a rush. She stepped onto the gravel with bare feet. That detail stuck with me, because it looked like the ground would have been scorching hot that time of day. But she didn't flinch. She just walked toward the fence and stood there, hands at her sides, like she was waiting for something. I remember thinking maybe they were homeless, or maybe squatting in the car, But that didn't explain the way she stared. Not at me. Not at anything specific. Just straight ahead, unfocused. When Kyle came back, I whispered for him to keep his voice down. He thought I was being dramatic until he saw the woman. Then, he sat down next to me, real quiet. We both watched. After a few minutes, the woman turned, walked back to the car, and got in. The man followed, slamming the trunk shut before climbing back into the driver's seat. We expected the car to leave. It didn't. It stayed there for another 20 minutes. We packed up early that day. The next morning, we biked past the lot before setting up. The station wagon was gone. I felt dumb for being nervous, but Kyle said we should keep the stand on our side of the street, just in case. The day went by with no sign of them, and I figured maybe it had just been a weird coincidence. Maybe they were just resting. Maybe they were waiting for someone. My brain kept trying to make it make sense. On Saturday, just after 1 o'clock, we were open for business when we heard the gravel crunch again. The same car, same dull paint, same idle engine. This time it didn't pull into the lot. It stayed parked along the curb, directly across from us. The man didn't get out. The windows were up again, but the woman was staring, right through the glass. She leaned forward slowly, her face pressing close to the windshield. I couldn't make out her expression, but I could see the smudge marks on the inside of the glass where her forehead and mouth were pressed. Her lips moved slightly, not in a way that suggested speaking. Just small, twitchy movements. Kyle reached down and closed the cooler. I stood up and said I had to use the bathroom. We left everything on the table and walked back to the house without looking back. We didn't run. We just walked fast. When we turned the corner, I finally looked over my shoulder. The car was still there. By the time my mom got home, it was gone. We didn't tell her. We tried again the next morning, figuring maybe it was safe earlier in the day. It was a little cloudy, and the light made the whole street look gray and muted. We were halfway through setting up when I noticed something near the edge of the lot. A plastic grocery bag had been tied to the fence. Inside, I could see something white. I walked over to check it out. Inside the bag was a neatly folded sweatshirt, the same one the woman had worn. The sleeves were tucked in. No note, no trash, just the sweatshirt. I didn't touch it. We packed up everything and left again. Kyle thought it was a prank, or maybe something someone left behind without realizing it. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for us. That night, I kept checking the window before bed. Nothing happened. No cars, no people. Just quiet. But when I woke up the next morning, my bike was lying on its side in the yard, even though I always parked it behind the gate. There were no footprints, no tire marks, just the bike, tipped over like it had been moved or dropped. I started waking up earlier, checking outside before Kyle even got up. For the next 2 days, nothing changed. I started thinking maybe it had all been a misunderstanding. Maybe they were just odd. Maybe I'd invented the rest of it with my imagination. That was until Tuesday morning, just after 10 o'clock. I was standing at the table alone, waiting for Kyle to come back from grabbing more soda. The wind picked up slightly. I heard the crunch of gravel and looked up, fully expecting that station wagon again. But it wasn't a car, it was the woman. She was standing on the other side of the road, right in front of the fence, facing me. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't frowning. Her face was blank in a way that made me feel physically sick. Like all the features were there, but the expression didn't match any human emotion. She raised one hand, not in a wave, just a slow, upward motion, palm facing in. Like she was testing something. I didn't move. I couldn't move. Then she lowered it, took one step back, and walked along the fence toward the corner of the lot. At first, I thought she was leaving, but she didn't. She just walked until she was out of sight behind the overgrown shrubs at the rear end of the property. I didn't see her again that day. Kyle came back, and I told him what happened. We packed up and swore we wouldn't go back there, not even to ride past. The lot stayed empty for the rest of the summer. But sometimes, When the wind changed, I'd catch the faintest smell of something sour in the air. Not rot, not garbage, something chemical, like plastic and old water. And even now, more than 15 years later, I still avoid that stretch of Birchwood Drive whenever I'm back home. I never told my parents what really happened that summer. If they noticed we'd stopped selling snacks, they didn't press us. I think my mom figured we just got bored. But I kept checking that lot. Even after Kyle left in early August, even after school started, I'd bike past it on my way home, forcing myself to glance over. Even though the sight of that place made my stomach tighten, nothing changed. No signs went up. No construction, just weeds and gravel and that sagging chain-link fence. The plastic bag with the sweatshirt disappeared after the first rainstorm. I never saw the car again. Never saw the woman. Not until years later. It was during my second year of college when I came home for winter break. I was driving my mom's car to pick up groceries one evening. It was almost 5 o'clock, just starting to get dark. I decided to take the long way, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted to see how the old neighborhood had changed. I hadn't been down Birchwood Drive since I left. The lot was still there. Nothing had been built. The fence looked even worse than I remembered. One of the corner posts had fallen inward. It must have been bent from a storm or something. I slowed the car a little. There was no snow on the ground yet, but the grass had gone brittle and brown. As I passed, my headlights lit something on the fence. A new sign, but not from a realtor. It was a small rectangular board, hand-painted in black letters. It just said, "Do not enter." Nothing else. I drove past without stopping, but my knuckles were white on the wheel. That sign didn't belong to any official agency. It didn't have a logo. It looked homemade, like someone who lived nearby had put it there. At the store, I kept thinking about how it was winter, how nobody in town walked around after dark, not when the cold settled in that fast. But whoever put that sign up had done it recently. The paint wasn't faded. The corners weren't curled. Back home, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop hearing the sound of gravel shifting under tires. That specific crunch. I thought about the man's arms moving in the back of the station wagon. I thought about the woman's blank face and the way she walked barefoot across that lot, as if the ground didn't affect her at all. The next morning, I asked my mom if anything had ever happened in that area. Any accidents, any crime reports. She said not that she remembered. She said the property had been listed and pulled off the market a bunch of times, but nobody ever seemed interested in buying it. When I asked why, she paused, then said the last few owners had all defaulted on taxes or backed out last minute without explanation. Later that day, I walked down there by myself. It was about 2 o'clock. Bright enough that I figured I could handle it. I stayed on the sidewalk, didn't cross over, just stood in front of the lot and stared through the chain link. There were no tracks, no trash, not even any birds. It felt still, like everything inside the fence was sealed off. The sign was still there, but now that I was closer, I noticed something else. Near the bottom corner of the fence, just behind the sign, someone had wrapped a length of twine through the metal links, like they'd tried to hold the gate closed but hadn't bothered with a proper lock. I stepped back. That's when I saw it. Near the far edge of the lot, tucked between two clusters of brittle weeds, was a shape, something dark and low to the ground. At first, I thought it was a trash bag, but it wasn't that shape. It was flatter, and it wasn't moving in the wind. I leaned slightly to the right, trying to get a better angle. It didn't help. The object stayed half hidden. I stood there for several minutes, unsure whether to cross the street. Eventually, I heard a screen door slam down the block and snapped out of it. I walked home quickly and didn't mention anything to my mom. That night, I had a dream I was inside the station wagon. The windows were fogged and the interior smelled like hot vinyl. I couldn't move my hands. I looked over to the passenger seat, and the woman was sitting there, head tilted, smiling without teeth. She didn't speak. Her eyes just twitched slightly in opposite directions, like they weren't connected to each other. When I woke up, my shirt was damp. I don't think I've ever sweated that much in my sleep before or since. I left town the next day. Years passed. I finished college, moved across the state, and took a job in tech support. I didn't go home very often, just for birthdays and the occasional holiday. Each time I made sure my route didn't take me anywhere near Birchwood Drive. But last year, right before Thanksgiving, I had to pick up my nephew from a soccer practice that ended early. My sister was running late and I was the only one nearby. I hadn't been to that part of town in ages. The minute I saw the street sign, I felt the dread hit me again. The lot was still there, still vacant, still fenced. But this time, there was something new. A single folding chair sat in the middle of the gravel. Not tipped over, not damaged. Just placed there, facing the street. It was one of those cheap metal ones with a vinyl seat and a small tier on the side. The kind you'd find at church functions or school auditoriums. But it didn't belong there. Nothing else around it, just empty space. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I picked up my nephew, dropped him off, and avoided that route completely on the way back. But the image stuck with me. Every time I close my eyes now, I see that chair. There's something deeply wrong about a space that never changes. Nature reclaims everything eventually. Grass grows, paint peels, fences fall, but that lot has stayed almost identical for over 20 years. And every so often, something gets added to it. Never taken away, just added. The car, the woman, the bag, the chair. It's like the place is collecting things, slowly, methodically. Last week, I had to go back home again. My father had heart surgery, and I took a few days off work to help out. I told myself I wouldn't even look in that direction. But on the second morning, I stepped outside for air and caught a glimpse through the trees. There were now 2 chairs, side by side, same model, same angle, same weathered vinyl. No sign of anyone nearby. I haven't slept since. I keep imagining those chairs turning, not moving physically, but being repositioned somehow, each night, by hands I can't see. Aligned a little more directly towards something. Maybe the house, maybe me. I know how crazy this sounds. I've told no one, not even Kyle. But I've started looking into property records, county logs, archived listings, everything I can find about that address. So far, I've come up empty. Ownership records are missing entire years. One document I found lists the lot as condemned, but there's no follow-up action. Another shows a purchase pending, but no buyer's name. All of it feels scrubbed, incomplete, like someone wanted the details to fade. Last night, I called a local realtor to ask about viewing lots for sale. I used a fake name. When I mentioned the Birchwood lot, the line went silent. After a few seconds, the woman told me her office doesn't handle that property. When I asked why, she paused again and said the address doesn't exist in their active database. I thanked her and hung up. I don't know what lives in that lot. I don't even know if it's a what. It might not be alive in any normal sense, but it's there. Waiting, watching, and whatever it is, it's patient. I've started seeing flashes in my dreams again. Quick glimpses of rust-colored cloth, the feel of burning pavement under bare feet, and something else, a new image I can't quite explain. It's the station wagon, empty, all the doors open, and behind it, just barely visible in the fog, is a third chair. I think that one's for me. When I was in college, I worked part-time for a community outreach program that documented abandoned or condemned properties in the county. Most of the work was dull. I spent long hours walking through buildings that smelled like mold and rat urine, taking photos of structural decay, tagging electrical panels, and logging notes about environmental hazards. But I didn't mind it. I liked the quiet. It gave me time to think. One building stayed with me, not because of what I saw, but because of what I felt. It was a decommissioned rehabilitation center about 15 minutes outside the city, tucked behind a wall of overgrown trees just off an old service road. It had been shut down years before I started the job, but locals still talked about it. Most people called it the Stanton Complex, though its official name was something long and clinical that I never bothered to remember. From the outside, it looked like every other government facility I had documented. Low concrete structures painted a shade of green so faded it might have been gray, windows boarded up or smashed in, vines crawling across the roof like veins. I expected the inside to be more of the same, cracked tiles, rusted beds, graffiti. But I was wrong. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed the silence. I'd worked in places far more isolated, but there was something about that building that made the quiet feel heavier, like it was watching me. My partner that day was a guy named Carl. He'd been doing site assessments longer than I had, and he didn't scare easy. But when we opened the main doors and felt the air shift, he stopped short and said he'd wait in the truck. I gave him a hard time about it later, but the truth is, I was relieved he didn't come in. I didn't want anyone else hearing the things I heard in there. The lobby was wide and empty, with linoleum floors that had buckled from water damage. A broken wheelchair lay on its side near the reception desk, its armrests snapped off. There were stains along the wall I didn't want to guess at. I started taking photos, moving slowly through the hallway that branched off to the right. Each wing of the facility was identical in layout. Rows of small rooms, most with rotting cots and overturned trays. What caught my attention wasn't the furniture, it was the drawings. Every wall in that hallway had crude sketches in crayon or pencil, sometimes both, always childlike. Some were simple stick figures with smiling faces. Others were less cheerful. I saw one drawing of a man with no eyes, another of a woman screaming behind bars. One door had tally marks scratched into the paint from top to bottom, hundreds of them. I told myself it was probably from the early days of the center, when they housed juvenile patients. But the longer I walked those halls, the more I noticed things that didn't add up. There were toys, plastic animals, stuffed bears, left in corners like someone had just dropped them. Some of them were clean, too clean. In one room I found a mattress that had no mold or tearing. It was covered in dust, but it didn't look like it belonged there. It looked recent. I lifted the corner and saw a spoon beneath it. I froze. It wasn't rusted or old, it was polished stainless steel like something from a cafeteria tray. My chest tightened. I put it back and stepped out, making sure the door stayed open behind me. As I moved into the second wing, I began to hear things. It started with a soft tapping noise, like someone gently knocking on a door somewhere down the corridor. I paused and listened. It stopped, I moved again, and the tapping resumed. 2 knocks, a pause, then one more. I turned around, convinced someone was playing a trick on me, but I was alone. I looked behind every open door I passed, even the supply closets. Nothing. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. I could see my breath by the time I reached the east wing, which was strange because it was mid-September and unseasonably warm outside. I opened a door near the end of the hall and stepped into what looked like a communal sleeping area. The beds were small and lined up along both walls, most with broken headboards or snapped legs. I took a few photos, then stopped when I saw something lying on the far mattress. It was a hospital bracelet. I walked over and picked it up. The name was smeared, unreadable, but the date stamped beneath it was from the previous year. That didn't make sense. This place had been sealed off for at least 5. I held the bracelet in my hand, turning it over, when I heard the giggle. It came from behind me. I spun around and saw no one. I scanned the beds. Then I looked at the corners of the room. Finally, I checked the window. It was shattered, but there was nothing outside, just trees and the dirt lot. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had come from outside. Maybe a sound carried in on the wind. But my skin told me otherwise. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. My legs began to tremble, just slightly. I didn't feel watched. I felt surrounded. I left the bracelet where I found it and walked back toward the main corridor. Every step felt harder to take, like the air was thickening around me. When I turned the corner to exit the east wing, I stopped dead. There was a chair sitting in the middle of the hallway. I hadn't seen it when I passed through before. It wasn't facing me. It was turned toward the wall, and behind it, the crayon drawings were different. Instead of childish scenes, the wall was covered in vertical lines, drawn in black crayon so hard that the wax had cracked. Each line was about the same length, and they went from the floor to halfway up the wall. At the very end of the sequence, there was a red line drawn sideways, crossing them all out. I counted 34 lines before I stopped. I didn't want to know how many there really were. I backed away slowly. The chair didn't move, but the silence had changed. It wasn't just absence of sound anymore. It felt charged, like static right before a lightning strike. My camera started acting up. The screen flickered, and every photo I tried to take came out warped, like someone had dragged their finger through it while the shutter clicked. I started walking faster. I didn't run yet, but my breathing picked up, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting something to be behind me. Every hallway looked longer than I remembered. Every doorway felt closer to the center of the hall than it should have. I reached the main lobby and nearly dropped my camera when I heard the sound again. Laughter, high-pitched and distant, echoing down the corridor behind me. This time, it was followed by the sound of something scraping across tile. Not a footstep, not metal, something dry like nails or claws dragging against linoleum. I ran. When I burst through the front door and saw the truck, I felt my knees buckle. Carl looked up from his phone and raised an eyebrow. He asked if I had finished already. I didn't answer. I got in and told him to drive. I made up some excuse about breathing in asbestos and not feeling well. He believed me. We didn't speak on the way back. That night, I laid in bed with the lights on, convinced I'd brought something home with me. Every creak in the apartment made me flinch. Around 2 o'clock, I thought I heard someone walk past my bedroom door. I sat up and listened, but there was nothing. Just silence. The next morning, I called our supervisor and told her I'd lost the SD card for that project. She wasn't happy, but she let it go. I never told her that I'd smashed the card with a hammer and flushed the pieces down the toilet. I never told anyone. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that hallway again. The chair, the black lines, and every once in a while, I wake up in the middle of the night, sure I can hear laughter just outside my door. I didn't go back to Stanton for nearly a year. I told myself I had moved on, that it was just a strange building with a bad history, and that I'd let my imagination get the better of me. But something changed that fall. My boss called to say they were liquidating some of the old properties, and the county was sending us out one last time to photograph the lots for archival purposes. She mentioned Stanton almost casually, as if it were any other job. I told her I was fine with it. I lied. I brought a different camera, different boots, even parked in a different spot when I arrived. Everything about my approach was carefully designed to feel new, as if that would erase what had happened. The place hadn't changed. If anything, it looked worse. Trees had collapsed on part of the north wing, and vines had started crawling through broken windows like the forest was reclaiming it. I walked up to the entrance slowly, remembering the way the air had shifted that first time. It didn't hit me as hard now, but the unease never left. I stayed near the front lobby for most of the morning, taking wide shots of the structure and close-ups of the entry points. I avoided the east corridor completely. That had always been the worst part. By noon, I was ready to leave, but before I did, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Near the base of the receptionist's desk was a stack of paper, yellowed but intact, clipped together and stamped with a faded logo. I picked it up and saw a date in the corner. It was from 6 months prior. I flipped through it. It looked like an inventory sheet. Beds, medical supplies, patient meals. But there was something off about it. The names of the staff were redacted. Every entry was blacked out except for a series of numbers and letters that didn't correspond to any code I recognized. Near the bottom of the last page was a handwritten note in blue ink. 5 returned, 1 not accounted for. East hallway secured. I dropped the papers and stepped back. The chill returned, but it wasn't just in my body. The temperature had shifted again. I watched my breath form in the air, and the sound came back. The tapping. 1 knock, pause, 2 more. It echoed from the same corridor I had avoided all morning. I turned and left. I didn't run this time, but I didn't stop moving until I was back in the car with the doors locked. I didn't tell my boss about the paper. I didn't send the photos from that trip either. I logged the job as complete and told her there wasn't much left to document. That was true, in a way. Whatever had been there was finished with the building. It wasn't finished with me. The dreams started a few nights later. Always the same, me walking through that hallway, seeing drawings that shifted when I blinked, hearing voices behind doors that wouldn't open. In one dream, I reached the last room on the right and saw a mirror instead of a window. In the reflection, I wasn't alone. A child stood behind me, barefoot and dressed in a stained hospital gown. I never saw their face. I always woke up before I could turn around. One night, I heard the knock in real life. I was half asleep when it started. 3 knocks on the bedroom wall. Not the door, the wall. The one that faced the outside. I sat up and held my breath. It came again. 1 knock, then 2 more. I got up and looked out the window. My apartment overlooked a narrow alley between buildings. No way to stand outside that wall. But the sound had been too clear to ignore. I didn't sleep again that night. I started leaving lights on in every room. My neighbors asked if I was okay. I told them I was working late and sleeping during the day. It wasn't true. I was awake most nights, sitting in the living room, listening for that knock. A few weeks later, I got a call from Carl. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the Stanton visit. He sounded different, nervous. He said he'd been meaning to check in, asked if anything weird had happened after that job. I told him not really. He paused, then said he'd gone back. He had met someone who wanted to use the location for a film project, and they needed updated interior shots. He agreed without thinking much of it. But when he went in, the place felt wrong. He said it smelled like bleach and metal, and he kept hearing doors creak open behind him, even though there was no wind. I asked what wing he had entered. He said he stayed near the front, didn't go past the old intake room. Then he asked a strange question. He wanted to know if I had ever heard music while I was in there. I said no. He told me he heard humming. Not a song exactly, just a voice, small, maybe a child's, humming the same few notes over and over. It stopped whenever he turned around. He didn't stay long. He said the last thing he saw before leaving was a doll sitting on the steps outside the building. It was clean. Its head was turned toward the door. After that call, the dreams changed. I wasn't in the building anymore. I was outside it, walking in circles, trying to find the entrance, only to realize it kept moving. In one dream, I saw Carl at a window, banging on the glass, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I started waking up with nosebleeds. I had never had those before. Then came the final visit. It wasn't work-related. I went on my own. I don't know why. Curiosity, guilt. Some part of me thought I could confront whatever was tied to that place and walk away clean. It was a stupid idea. The building was the same. More broken windows, more overgrowth. I brought a flashlight this time, but it died after 15 minutes. I moved through the main corridor using the light from my phone. I didn't take photos. I didn't even look at the drawings. I walked straight to the east wing. The air felt electric, like something was about to happen. The silence was so dense that my own footsteps sounded wrong. I passed the room with the mattress. The bracelet was gone. The spoon was still there, polished. I kept walking until I reached the last door, the one with the lines on the wall. It was closed now. I reached for the handle and felt my fingers tremble. My chest hurt. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I opened the door. Inside, everything was neat, clean. There was a single bed in the center of the room with a folded blanket on top, a chair in the corner, and the wall, blank. No drawings, no scratches, just a small handwritten message in the center, drawn in black crayon. Not finished. That's when the noise came. Not tapping this time. Not laughter. Breathing. Shallow, rapid breathing coming from under the bed. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the words on the wall until I couldn't hear the breathing anymore. When I turned to leave, the hallway was different. All the doors were open, every single one. And at the end of the corridor, just before the turn into the main lobby, a figure stood, small, still, dressed in white. I didn't wait. I turned back into the room, slammed the door, and pushed the chair against the handle. I stayed there for hours until light began to fill the hallway outside. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the door was open and the chair was back in the corner. I left the building and didn't look back. I drove home and called my supervisor. I told her I quit. She didn't ask why. I think she knew. I never spoke to Carl again. His number stopped working not long after our last call. It's been 5 years. I live in a different state now, work a different job, keep to myself. But every now and then I hear the knock. 1, pause, 2 more, always at night, always from a wall that shouldn't have anything behind it. Last week I found a photograph on my porch. No envelope, no note, just a faded photo of the Stanton complex taken from the tree line. In the lower corner near one of the windows, a small shape stands, barefoot, dressed in white. I don't sleep with the lights off anymore. I don't listen to music, and I never, ever answer a knock I didn't expect. I spent the summer after my second year of college working at a crematory on the outskirts of a small industrial town. My roommate's cousin ran the place and offered me under-the-table pay to help clean up, run errands, and assist with basic prep work. It wasn't exactly a dream job, but the money was good and the hours were flexible. I told myself it was temporary. Just a few months, nothing more. I wasn't prepared for how quickly the silence of that place would get under my skin. The building itself looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. Pale green linoleum floors, flickering fluorescence overhead, and a constant humming from the ventilation that somehow made every quiet moment feel louder. The cremation chamber was tucked in the back, past 2 empty offices and a locker room nobody used. I spent most of my days wiping down metal counters, breaking down boxes, or occasionally watching the machine cycle through its process when the owner needed an extra hand. By the middle of July, I had stopped reacting to the bodies. They came in zip bags, already cold, already still. I never saw anyone alive on that table, just names on toe tags and paperwork filled out by people I never met. My job was to treat the space with respect, follow protocol, and stay out of the way when the licensed techs handled the real work. On a Wednesday morning around 10 o'clock, I showed up to find the bay door already open. A plain white van was parked just outside. There was no signage, nothing to identify it. Inside, 2 men were lifting a long steel gurney from the back. One of them looked to be in his 40s, built like a construction worker, with a shaved head and forearms covered in old tattoos. The other man was older, maybe late 60s, with a deeply lined face and a full suit that looked stiff in the summer heat. I assumed he was the director. I was about to step aside when the older man gestured to me. He didn't say anything, just looked directly at me, then nodded toward the gurney. I glanced back at the cousin's cousin, the guy technically in charge, but he was nowhere in sight. So I stepped in and helped guide the gurney down the ramp. The man in the suit kept walking beside us, but never said a word. We rolled the body into the prep room. The stainless steel table was already cleaned and set. The younger man walked out without a word, leaving me alone with the older one. He pulled a clipboard from a plastic sleeve mounted on the wall and handed it to me. The name was blank. Just a date and time and the initials of someone I didn't recognize. He tapped the bottom of the page where a signature should have gone, but didn't. I looked up at him, confused, but he didn't offer any explanation. I knew better than to ask too many questions, especially when I wasn't technically supposed to be handling anything beyond cleanup. Still, the situation felt wrong. The silence between us wasn't just awkward, it felt deliberate. He stepped back, folded his hands behind his back, and waited. I placed the clipboard on the counter and reached for the strap on the body bag. When I unzipped it, the smell hit me first. Not rot, just an odd chemical scent, like burnt plastic mixed with something bitter. The man lying inside looked young, maybe mid-30s. His skin wasn't pale like the others, it was flushed, almost too much color. His jaw was slightly open, and I thought I saw moisture in the corner of his eye. I told myself that was normal. Biological responses don't always shut down immediately. The techs had told me that once. Still, something about it made my chest tighten. I stepped back and turned toward the chamber, pretending to check the temperature reading. The man in the suit was still standing in the doorway, watching me. He hadn't blinked once. I forced myself to follow the routine. Load the body, align the table, secure the belt. The chamber door slid open with a slow, mechanical groan. I pressed the button and the gurney slid inward, stopping just as the heat began to rise. I closed the panel and waited for the familiar click that meant the cycle had started. He didn't move. Not even after the door sealed shut, not even when the first coils began to glow behind the glass. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 minutes, he turned and walked out. I could hear his steps echo down the hall. I was left alone with the machine. I tried to busy myself, swept the prep room, disinfected the counter, anything to keep my back turned. But my ears kept picking up faint sounds. The building always creaked, metal shifting with heat, vents clicking as they expanded. But that day, the rhythm was wrong. Too steady, too human. I set the broom aside and walked back toward the chamber. I didn't hear anything at first, just the low hum of the gas burner. Then something thudded against the inside panel. I froze. My eyes went to the control panel. Nothing looked off. The temperature was rising exactly as it should. Another thud, then another. I pressed my ear to the wall, not the glass. The thick steel frame next to it. The sound was muted, but I could hear it. A pattern, like fists. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop altogether. I checked the seals. No leaks, no alarms. But the sound continued, not loud, but insistent, deliberate. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't licensed. I didn't even know how to safely stop the cycle. And even if I did, what would I say? That the body moved? That it knocked? I backed out of the room and walked quickly to the front office. The younger man was outside smoking. I told him what I heard. He squinted at me, then dropped his cigarette and stepped on it. Without a word, he followed me back to the chamber. I opened the door to the room and pointed toward the machine. We both stood there, listening. Nothing, no sound. Just the low hum of heat rising, the occasional crack of expanding metal. "I don't hear anything," he finally said. The words made my skin crawl. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Flat, rehearsed, like he already knew. He left without another word. I stayed behind, rooted to the floor. I listened for almost 20 minutes. I didn't hear it again. But the feeling stayed. That something had gone very wrong. That someone had known it would. When the timer hit the 90-minute mark, I opened the collection drawer. The remains looked the same as always. I sifted through them with the tool, checking for metal fragments. Nothing unusual. No signs of struggle. No trace of panic. I poured the ash into the urn and sealed it. When I brought it to the office, the man in the suit was already there. Still silent. Still watching. He took the urn without a word and walked out the door. He never signed the release form. That night, I asked the cousin's cousin who the man was. He shrugged, said people use third-party contractors all the time. I pressed a little harder, asking if it was normal for someone to take remains without paperwork. He didn't answer, just handed me my cash envelope for the week and told me not to worry about it. But I did worry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the sound in my head. Not the machine, not the vents, the knocking, the rhythm, the unmistakable pattern of someone alive and trapped. The next day, I checked the log. There was no entry for the cremation, no initials, no timestamp, no tag number. It was like it never happened. I didn't ask about it again, but every so often when I walked past that chamber, I paused. I stared at the metal door, listened to the hum, and tried not to think about what I heard. That summer ended. I went back to school. I didn't take another job like that again. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear it. Not loud, not close, just faint, like someone knocking far beneath the floor. And each time I wonder, how long did he last in there? About a year later, during winter break, I found myself back in town to visit my mother. She still lived in the same neighborhood, just a few miles from the crematory. We were never particularly close, but I made the effort because I felt like I owed her that much. One afternoon, I took her car to run errands and passed by the building without meaning to. I hadn't driven that route since the summer job. I almost kept going, but something made me slow down. The sign was still there, faded but intact. The bay door was open and the parking lot looked empty except for a battered sedan parked along the side wall. I don't know why I pulled in. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it hadn't been as strange as I remembered. Maybe I thought I'd see the cousin's cousin and get some kind of closure. I knocked once, then pushed the door open. The lobby was dark, just a single bulb flickering overhead. I walked past the front counter and called out, but no one answered. The place smelled different than I remembered. Less chemical, more like dust and cold air that hadn't moved in weeks. I stepped into the prep area. The equipment was still there, untouched. The chamber was closed, the metal looking dull from age. On a shelf near the door, I saw a stack of old paperwork held together with a rusted clip. I flipped through the top few pages, scanning for familiar dates. One caught my eye. The cremation from that day, the one with no name, no record, wasn't listed, but there was a slip tucked behind the others, torn on one corner. The date matched, the time too, but instead of a full report, there was a single line written in red ink. Witnessed, logged off record, do not revisit. No initials, no author, no signature. I didn't know what to make of it. I left the paper where it was and stepped back, my hand still trembling from the sudden rush of cold running through my body. The lights in the back flickered again, and something about the sound reminded me of the chamber. The faint clicking noise that came just before the knocking started. I backed out of the room and left the building without another word. That night, I told myself I wouldn't think about it again. But memory doesn't work like that. Once something awful lodges itself deep enough, it comes back when you least expect it. I started dreaming about the chamber again. In the dreams, I'd hear the knocking from inside the floor. Not loud, just steady. I'd walk toward it, unable to stop myself, and every time I'd find a sealed hatch where the cremation unit used to be. I'd open it, and inside would be an empty gurney, still warm to the touch. The room would be silent, but I could feel breath on my neck, like someone standing behind me. When I turned, there'd be no one there. The dream stopped after a few months. I thought maybe that meant I'd finally let it go. But then I got an email. It came from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body of the message had no text, just a scanned document. It was a cremation authorization form, incomplete. Same layout I'd used all summer long, but this one had a photo attached. A small, grainy shot clipped to the corner. It was the man in the suit. Older now, thinner, still wearing black, standing in what looked like a parking lot. In the background was a different building, but with the same cremation unit, the same walls, the same metal paneling. Below the photo, there was one sentence typed in all caps. Always watch the first 15 minutes. No sender name, no reply address. I didn't respond. I deleted the message, then emptied the trash folder. But the sentence stuck with me. I couldn't forget it. I found myself researching cremation process times, human reaction to extreme heat, reflexive movement in the recently deceased. I found forums where funeral techs swapped stories, odd noises, unexplained shifts, strange behavior from clients who came alone. One thread stood out. A user with a string of random numbers for a name had posted about a private cremation service run in several states. He claimed they used temporary facilities, rotated staff regularly, and processed clients who were never entered into public records. I tried to follow the comments, but the post was removed 2 days later. I didn't sleep that week. I started checking the windows before bed. Not because I thought someone was watching, but because I wanted to be sure I was still on the outside, still in the world of the living. In late spring, I got a phone call from a number with no ID. I let it ring. It called again and again. On the third try, I picked up. There was no voice, just the sound of machinery, a low whirring, then the unmistakable hiss of gas lines pressurizing. I hung up. 2 weeks later, someone left a package on my doorstep. There was no label, no return address. Inside was a small metal urn. It was sealed, unmarked, and cold to the touch. I didn't open it. I buried it behind the house that night, wrapped in old towels. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was a prank. But part of me didn't believe that. Part of me knew it was a warning. The next day I left town. I changed my number. I moved states. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. That was 3 years ago. Now, I live in a quiet place, far from any city, far from any crematory. I work remotely. I don't leave often. My house has no basement, no crawl space, no place where heat might rise from below. But I still hear it sometimes, the knock. It doesn't come from beneath me now. It comes from the walls, slow, measured, almost polite. I don't answer. I don't speak. And I never, ever open the door after dark. Because I don't think it's about the man in the oven anymore. I think it's about the man who brought him, and I don't think he ever left. It started during the summer after my first year of college. I had come back home to help my mom take care of the house after she had knee surgery. She lived in a quiet neighborhood, in a small town about an hour outside the city. The kind of place where everyone waves at each other but doesn't really talk. I hadn't been home for more than a week before I noticed the house across the street had new tenants. It wasn't like I paid much attention at first. The house had been vacant for a while, so seeing someone finally move in didn't seem strange. The man who moved in was probably in his late 40s, tall, with this sun-damaged skin and thinning black hair that he combed back like it mattered. He drove an older sedan with a cracked windshield and mismatched hubcaps. What I remember most, though, was the way he stared from his porch, through his windows. Every time I stepped outside, he was just there. The first time I really noticed it was when I went out to take the trash to the curb. It was maybe 6:20 p.m. and the sun had already dipped behind the trees. I felt at first a prickle on my skin, like static. And when I turned, I saw him watching from his front steps, just sitting there with a cigarette burning between 2 fingers. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just stared. Eyes locked onto me like he was trying to memorize something. I told myself it was nothing. Just a lonely guy, maybe. I had no reason to think otherwise, and Mom wasn't exactly in the mood to entertain any gossip. Her surgery had left her in constant discomfort, and most of my time was spent running errands or bringing her ice packs. I didn't say anything about it for the first few days. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but it didn't stop. He was there again when I mowed the lawn. Then again when I checked the mail. And once, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I caught him looking at me through binoculars from his upstairs window. That one made my stomach twist. I ducked back inside the house and locked the front door without thinking. My hands were shaking as I closed all the blinds. That night, I told Mom. She didn't say much at first, just looked at me over the rim of her mug like she was waiting to see if I'd laugh it off. When I didn't, she slowly set the cup down and said, "I don't like that man either. I've seen him watching me too." That chilled me more than anything. I had hoped she would tell me I was imagining things, but instead, she told me not to go outside unless I had to. Keep the doors locked, close the curtains after dark, that kind of thing. I did what she asked. For a while, I avoided going out completely. I started grocery shopping early in the mornings before most people were awake. And even then, I kept checking the rearview mirror like I expected him to be behind me. I didn't know his name. I didn't want to know. One morning, I noticed a small package on the front porch. No label, no note, just a cardboard box with a piece of twine tied around it. I thought maybe one of the neighbors had dropped something off for my mom, so I brought it inside. She opened it while I was putting away groceries, and I heard her draw in this sharp breath, like she'd touched something hot. Inside was a necklace. Nothing fancy, just a simple chain with a pendant shaped like a bird. But what unsettled me wasn't the necklace itself. It was the fact that it was identical to one I had lost in high school. Not similar, identical. Same scratches on the back, same kink in the chain near the clasp. My mom didn't say anything. She just looked at me and slowly closed the box. Then she got up and locked the door. We called the police that afternoon, but there wasn't much they could do. There was no proof the man across the street had anything to do with it. No fingerprints, no camera footage, just a box left on a porch in a quiet neighborhood. The officer took our statement and left with a warning. Be careful. If anything else happens, don't wait to call. That night I barely slept. Every creak in the house made my heart race. Around 1:30, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch. Not loud, but deliberate, like someone was walking slowly, step by step, right outside our front door. I didn't dare look out the window. I just lay there in bed, clutching the phone, watching the ceiling until the sun came up. For a few days, nothing happened. I started to think maybe it was over. Maybe the police visit had scared him off. I almost felt stupid for being so worked up. Then one afternoon, I went out back to water the plants, and I found something new. Hanging from the wooden slats of the fence was a photo. It had been clipped there with a rusted binder clip. The photo showed me in our backyard, bent over the garden bed, holding a trowel. I don't know when it was taken. I don't know how, but it was recent. I was wearing the same clothes I had worn earlier that week. That time, I didn't hesitate. I called the police again. An officer came out and took the photo, but just like before, there wasn't anything they could do. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no direct evidence. I tried to explain how dangerous it felt, how I was scared to even walk through my own house without checking every window first. But the officer just nodded and told me to stay alert. I started carrying a knife in my jacket pocket. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't want to scare her more than she already was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. I started sleeping on the couch, closer to the front door. I figured if anyone broke in, I'd hear them before they got to the bedroom. One morning around 7:30, I looked out the window and saw him in his yard again. He was trimming hedges, shirtless despite the cold, and he paused when he noticed me. Just stood there, clipping shears in hand, smiling. Not a normal smile either. It was wide and frozen, like someone had told him how to smile, but he didn't quite get it right. I let the curtain drop and stepped away from the window. Later that day, I found another package. This one was left in the mailbox. Inside was a notebook filled with handwritten pages, dozens of entries, all about me. He had written about when I came home, when I left, what I wore, who I talked to on the phone. There were notes about what groceries I bought, what music I played in the car, what room I slept in. It was so detailed it made my vision blur. I felt my legs go weak, and I had to sit down on the steps outside the house. When I brought it inside and showed it to my mom, she took one look and told me to start packing. We left that night. She booked a hotel in another town, a little over 2 hours away. I didn't even argue. I just drove. Every time I checked the mirror, I half expected to see his car behind us. But there was nothing. No headlights, no movement, just a long stretch of highway and the pounding in my chest. At the hotel, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, kept the chair wedged under the doorknob. I knew I wouldn't feel safe until that man was behind bars. But deep down, I also knew there wasn't enough to put him there. Not yet. The next morning, we went to the local police station and turned in the notebook. This time, it was enough. Between the surveillance entries and the trespassing, they opened a case. But he was gone. When they went back to the house across the street, he had already cleared out. The place was empty. No forwarding address, no name on file. He had vanished like he knew we were coming for him. The police said they'd keep the case open, but without a warrant or more direct evidence, there wasn't much they could pursue. The man had left behind no belongings, no mail, not even a fingerprint inside the house. It was as if he had known exactly what to take and how long he had before anyone came looking. I remember the officer saying, almost under his breath, that the whole setup felt practiced. Mom stayed in that hotel for nearly 3 weeks while I bounced between friends' houses. I didn't want her alone, but I also couldn't bring myself to return to that neighborhood. Not even to pack the rest of our things. We ended up hiring a moving service just to box everything and haul it to a storage unit near the edge of town. I didn't even know what they packed. I didn't care. I just wanted out. By mid-fall, we found a small rental house on the other side of the state. It was tucked behind a used bookstore and a post office, close enough to things that we didn't feel isolated, but far enough from the main road that we felt like we had some privacy. I had hoped that change would help, that putting enough distance between us and that house would let me sleep again. But even with all the locks and security cameras, I still kept waking up at odd hours, around 3 or 4 in the morning, always with the sense that I was being watched. My skin would itch, like something invisible had brushed against it. Sometimes I'd sit up and find the curtains in the living room swaying gently, even though we never opened the windows. Once I found a small pebble on the inside windowsill. Another time, it was a crumpled receipt from a diner we had never visited. I didn't tell Mom about any of that. Her limp was already worse from the stress, and her blood pressure had spiked badly enough that her doctor put her on new medication. She needed to believe we were safe. I couldn't take that away from her. So I kept it to myself and convinced myself I was just rattled, that the fear had outlasted the danger. That illusion held until December. It was a Wednesday, cold and gray, with a dusting of snow that made everything feel quieter than usual. I had taken the trash out to the side of the house and was walking back when I noticed something on the front porch. At first I thought it was just another delivery, maybe something my mom had ordered for the holidays. But the box didn't have any markings, no tape, just a flat cardboard square with a familiar piece of twine tied in a neat bow. I froze. There was no reason for that box to be there. No way anyone outside our house would know that exact twine. I didn't move for nearly a full minute. Just stood there, staring at it while my breath clouded in the air. My first instinct was to leave it alone. Don't touch it. Just go back inside and call someone. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside the box was a folded sheet of paper and a single photograph. The photo showed me sitting on our new porch about a week earlier, wearing the same scarf I had lost last month. The paper underneath had just one sentence, written in tiny, precise handwriting, Not far enough. I dropped the box and backed away, stumbling down the steps. My knees felt weak, like they might just give out under me. I ran inside and locked the door behind me. My chest was tight, and for a few moments I couldn't get a full breath. I thought I might pass out. When I finally managed to calm down enough to speak, I told my mom everything. That night, we called the police again. Different department, different town, but the officer who showed up was surprisingly understanding. He took the box and photo, filed a report, and stayed until we calmed down. He even offered to have a cruiser do a few extra passes through the neighborhood for the next few weeks. Still, there wasn't much else they could do. We installed more cameras after that. Motion lights, window sensors, anything we could afford. But no matter how much tech we added, it didn't change the way I felt walking through the house at night. I kept imagining someone standing outside the glass, just beyond the camera's range, waiting, watching. And then the calls started. Not frequent, just one every few days. Always from an unknown number. No voicemail, just a single ring sometimes, other times 2 or 3. Once, it rang 4 times and then stopped right before I could answer. I contacted our cell provider, but the numbers were always masked or disconnected by the time we tried to trace them. One night, around 2:40 a.m., I woke up to the ringtone again. This time I answered without thinking. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just silence. Then a soft sound like wind or static, followed by something else. Breathing. Shallow and measured, like the caller wanted me to hear but not clearly. I hung up immediately and sat there in the dark, gripping my phone until my knuckles turned white. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I bought a prepaid phone and changed my number. I didn't even tell my closest friends, just in case. Things stayed quiet after that. No more packages, no more photos, no more calls. Weeks went by, then months. My mom's limp improved a little, and she started going out again. Short walks, errands, things like that. I started applying for jobs, mostly remote work. I still didn't like going outside alone. One afternoon in April, I was walking home from the corner store when I saw an unfamiliar car parked across the street from our house. It was an old white sedan, a model I didn't recognize with out-of-state plates. At first, I figured it was a delivery driver or maybe a new neighbor. But then I noticed the car was empty. Engine off, windows up, no driver in sight. I watched it for a while, pretending to check my phone. After 5 minutes with no movement, I walked around the block and came back from the opposite direction. Still empty. Still parked in the same place. I waited until it got dark, and then it was gone. I told myself it was a coincidence, just a random visitor. But that night, I made sure every window was locked. I slept with the knife beside my bed again. A week later, I got a job offer from a small tech company out west. Fully remote. Decent pay. I accepted it immediately. My mom and I decided we'd move again. Not just to another town, but another state. Somewhere with fewer memories. Somewhere we could start over. Before we left, I visited the storage unit we had rented after the first move. I wasn't planning to take much with me, but I wanted to sort through a few things, see what was worth keeping. While I was there, I opened one of the boxes labeled porch closet. It was filled with random junk, light bulbs, cords, old tools. Taped to the bottom of the box was a photo. It was another picture of me. This one had been taken through a crack in the fence, probably during our last week at the old house. I was sitting on the porch, reading a book, barefoot. I hadn't seen that photo before. It wasn't one the police had collected, which meant it had either been missed or planted afterward. I didn't tell my mom about that one either. I just threw the photo away, locked the unit, and walked out without looking back. We've been in our new place for over a year now. Different time zone, different weather. I use a fake name on all social media. I never post my location. We have security cameras, alarms, 2 dogs, and neighbors who actually talk to us. I haven't received a call, letter, or package since the move, but that fear never really left. Every time I see an older sedan on the road, I feel my hands tighten on the wheel. Every time I hear a phone ring, my stomach knots. Every time someone knocks at the door and I'm not expecting anyone, I freeze. The worst part is knowing that if he really wanted to find me, he probably could. He had found us before. Twice. Without leaving a single trace. I don't know if he's watching from a distance, or if he got bored and moved on, or if he's waiting for me to let my guard down. All I know is this: when someone decides to make you the center of their world, it doesn't always end with a trial or a sentence. Sometimes it just pauses. That's what scares me most. Not that he's gone, but that he might still be out there, waiting. My grandfather had a hunting cabin up in the Laurentians, a good 2-hour drive north of St. Jerome. It wasn't fancy, just a single-floor wood structure with a small stove, a metal sink, and a pair of bunk beds crammed into one room. But when I was 12, that cabin felt like the edge of the world. My cousins and I would pile in every July, sleeping with the windows open, pretending the distant owl calls were something watching us from the trees. That particular summer, it was just me, my cousin Daniel, and his younger sister Clara. Daniel was 13, quiet but tough. Clara was only 9, but sharp and fearless in a way that sometimes made me uneasy. We'd gone up with my uncle for the weekend, mostly to get out of the city while the adults cleared out our grandfather's old things. He'd passed the previous winter, and the place had sat untouched since. I remember how still it felt when we arrived. Like the woods had settled into themselves without anyone there. The ridge behind the cabin was steep and covered in thick brush. Our grandfather used to tell us not to go past the old water line, a muddy cut through the undergrowth where the mountain runoff would trickle in spring. Beyond that, he said, the land rose sharply and twisted back on itself, full of sinkholes and crumbling stone. He said it was easy to get turned around, even easier to fall. The first night, Daniel and I stayed up late, sitting on the porch while Clara slept inside. The moonlight was bright enough to see the slope behind the cabin. I asked Daniel if he remembered what our grandfather used to say about the ridge. He just nodded and didn't say much. Around midnight, we heard what sounded like a voice in the trees. Not shouting or crying, just a voice, talking low and steady, like someone on a phone call you couldn't quite catch. We waited, holding our breath. But after a minute, it stopped, and we convinced ourselves it had just been wind moving through the trees. The next morning, Clara wanted to explore. The adults had driven back to town for the day, giving us strict instructions to stay near the cabin. We all knew that meant nothing. Daniel packed some water bottles and snacks, and before I could really argue, Clara had already ducked under the broken fence behind the shed and headed toward the water line. I hesitated. I still remembered my grandfather's warnings, but I followed. I think I would have followed them anywhere back then. The climb started off easy. We found a deer trail and used it to gain some height. I kept looking back at the cabin until the roof finally disappeared behind the trees. It was hot and humid, and the bugs were relentless, but Clara pushed ahead like she was looking for something. About 20 minutes in, we came across a flat clearing where the trees thinned out and the light turned a strange shade of yellow. There was a boulder there, covered in lichen and deep scratches that didn't look natural. Daniel sat down to rest and Clara walked to the far side of the clearing. She said she could hear water. I couldn't, but she insisted, cupping her ear and pointing toward a thicket. That's when the air changed. I don't know how else to explain it. It wasn't just temperature or wind. It was like the space around us got heavier, denser. I remember thinking we'd gone too far. Clara vanished into the trees before we could stop her. Daniel swore under his breath and ran after her. I hesitated again. I wanted to call out, but something about the air made my throat tighten. I stepped forward, slowly, trying to stay on the patches of dry ground. After about 10 yards, I found Clara kneeling beside a shallow pit filled with dark water. Daniel stood behind her, pale and motionless. The water wasn't natural. It didn't reflect anything. Not the sky, not the trees. It just absorbed the light like a patch of ink. Clara said it was whispering. I leaned closer and heard nothing. But then Daniel grabbed her shoulder and said we needed to go. His voice cracked when he said it, which scared me more than anything. We turned back, retracing our steps, but the trail had shifted. I know how that sounds, but the deer path we followed earlier was gone. The trees were packed closer, and the slope felt steeper. After 15 minutes of walking, the terrain started to feel unfamiliar. There were tree stumps where there hadn't been, and the ground felt spongy and soft. We kept moving downhill, thinking we'd find the cabin again. At some point, Clara started to lag behind. I turned to tell her to hurry up, but she wasn't there, just gone. Daniel ran back up the trail, calling her name. I followed, but every direction looked the same. The woods swallowed sound in a way I'd never experienced. I could hear Daniel yelling, but it sounded like he was 100 feet away, even when I could see him just down the slope. We spent the next hour searching, calling, circling, then splitting up and meeting again at the clearing with the scratched boulder. Clara never answered. No broken branches, no footsteps, no sign she had ever been there. By the time the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows through the trees, we were dehydrated and panicked. I kept imagining what we'd tell my uncle when he got back, how we'd lost a 9-year-old girl in the woods behind a family cabin. Eventually, we found a utility pole. That's what saved us. The sight of it cut through the fear and gave us something real to follow. We hiked downhill until we hit the gravel road that led to the cabin. The adults weren't back yet. Daniel broke down when we got inside. I wanted to stay strong, but when I sat on the bottom bunk, I started shaking so hard I couldn't hold my water bottle. We waited until nearly 8 o'clock. My uncle's truck pulled up, and we told him everything. He didn't speak, just drove to the nearest station and called in a search. That night, the woods behind the cabin lit up with flashlights and search dogs. They searched for 3 days. Helicopters circled. Volunteers combed the ridge. They found the clearing, the boulder, and the strange pit of water. But no sign of Clara. No footprints, no clothing, nothing. Eventually, the police told us she must have wandered off further than we thought. That it wasn't uncommon for children to panic and run in the wrong direction. They filed it as a missing person case and left it open. I've only been back to the cabin once since then. It was 10 years later with a group of friends who wanted to camp in the woods and get away from everything. I didn't tell them the full story, just warned them to stay on the lower trails. On the second night, I woke up around 4 o'clock, heart pounding. I don't know what stirred me, but something felt off. I went outside with my flashlight and stepped around the side of the cabin to relieve myself. That's when I heard a voice. Not close, but not far either. A girl's voice. Just 3 words. I found it. I froze. The flashlight flickered. The voice didn't come again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't tell the others. But when we left, I made sure no one left anything behind. I haven't been back since. The months after Clara disappeared felt like being suspended in thick syrup. Every day dragged. At school, I'd catch myself watching the door, waiting for her to walk through like nothing had happened. At night, I kept replaying the sound of her feet crunching leaves as she wandered ahead of us. The guilt buried itself deep. I should have stopped her. I should have taken her hand and dragged her back down the hill. Instead, I froze. Daniel and I didn't speak much after that summer. His parents sold the cabin the following spring. A quiet couple from Trois-Rivières bought it, intending to turn it into a rental for hikers. I never heard whether they followed through. I couldn't bring myself to ask. By the time I was in college, I'd trained myself not to think about Clara. I pushed it down, hard. That worked for a while. I got busy. I graduated, started a job in Montreal, rented a tiny apartment, and spent most weekends trying to forget how small the world had felt that day on the ridge. But then my phone rang one evening. It was Daniel. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 6 years. His voice sounded raw, like he'd been shouting or crying. He said he had something he needed to tell me, not over the phone. He asked if I could meet him that weekend, said he'd drive to me. We met at a diner just outside the city. He looked older than I remembered, worn down in a way that didn't match his age. He ordered coffee but didn't touch it. After a few minutes of silence, he told me he'd gone back. Not just once, 3 times. The first time had been 2 years after Clara vanished. He said he couldn't explain why he did it, just that it felt unfinished. The couple who bought the cabin had never moved in. They tried to rent it out for one summer but stopped after a few guests complained about strange sounds at night. Whispers, pacing outside the windows. One renter left in the middle of the night and never returned for their deposit. Daniel said the cabin sat empty now, padlocked but easy enough to get into. The woods had overgrown the trail. He'd gone up alone, stood in the same clearing where we'd last seen her. The boulder still had those strange scratches. The pit of water was still there, untouched. He said he thought he heard breathing just past the trees. When he looked, nothing was there. The second time he went, he left a scarf that used to belong to Clara, draped it over a tree branch above the clearing. When he returned 2 weeks later, the scarf was gone. The third time had been recent. That's what pushed him to call me. He said he'd brought a friend, someone he trusted. They had camping gear and a satellite phone. This time, they set up a tent right in the clearing. Stayed from 6 o'clock in the evening until 8 o'clock the next morning. Nothing happened all night, but when they woke up, the pit had changed. It wasn't water anymore, just dry dirt, as if something had been pulled out. His friend refused to talk about it afterward, blocked his number. Daniel didn't know what to make of it, but something about the way he told the story chilled me. It didn't sound like obsession. It sounded like grief turning in on itself. He slid a photograph across the table, said he took it right before they packed up. The clearing looked the same, mostly, but behind the boulder, partly hidden by a fallen tree, was a new shape in the dirt. Shallow, rectangular, like a grave someone forgot to finish. I gave the photo back and told him I didn't want to hear more. He didn't argue, just nodded and left. For the next few weeks, I kept seeing Clara in my dreams, not as a child, but older, closer to the age she'd be now, always standing just behind something. Trees, fog, a curtain, watching me, but never speaking. One night, I woke up to my apartment bathed in a blue light I couldn't trace. I stood by the window and saw nothing out of place. But in the quiet, I heard it again. 3 words, I found it, whispered, not from outside but from the hallway inside my apartment. I checked every room, nothing. No open windows, no sign of anyone. I didn't sleep that night either. I tried to forget again. I really did. But then a few months later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, grainy and overexposed, but I recognized it instantly. The boulder, and standing next to it, back turned, was a girl in a red sweater. Clara's sweater. The one she wore the day she disappeared. The police wouldn't reopen the case. Said there was no proof it was recent, no way to verify when or where the photo was taken. But I knew. Daniel didn't send it, I asked. He swore on our grandfather's grave that he hadn't. So I made a choice. Probably the worst one I've ever made. I drove back. The ridge looked the same. The cabin was boarded up now. Windows covered, door chained. I parked off the road and walked in from the west, taking the long trail around to avoid the neighbors. I brought a pack, flashlight, matches, and a disposable camera. I didn't plan to stay long. I just wanted to see the clearing one more time, see if the boulder was still there. Maybe take a picture and be done with it. The forest felt different. Not darker, not colder, just less alive. No bird song, no rustling. Even the bugs seemed to avoid the trees around the ridge. I found the clearing by late afternoon. The boulder still bore the same scratches, and the earth near the pit was disturbed again. Something had moved recently. I didn't approach it. I took 2 photos, then turned to leave. But the woods behind me didn't look right. Trees too close together, no trail. I turned again. Still wrong. Every direction felt off. I closed my eyes and took 10 deep breaths. When I opened them, I chose a heading and walked. I walked until the light dimmed and the air thickened and my legs began to shake. Then I heard her. Not a whisper, a voice. Clear. I found it. I found it. Not sad, not pleading, almost proud. I turned and for a second I saw her, standing near the boulder, her face in shadow, her hand pointing downward toward the pit. Then she was gone. I ran, fell twice, cut my hand on something sharp, but I kept going until I saw the reflection of metal through the trees, my car. I haven't told anyone else this, not Daniel, not even my wife. I keep the camera in a drawer, undeveloped. I don't need proof anymore. I know what I saw, I know where she is, and I know something waits there. Not just in the woods, but under them. It didn't take her by mistake, it called her. And now it calls others. Every year someone goes missing near that ridge. A hiker, a camper, a child wandering too far from their parents. They file the reports, mount rescue efforts, blame the terrain or the weather. But I know, when the trees lean in, when the air feels wrong, when the light stops bouncing off the water, it means the ground has opened again, and something is waiting to be found. I was 19 when it happened. Still living at home with my dad, just outside a small town in southern Illinois. He worked nights at a nearby distribution center, loading freight onto trucks, so I had the house to myself most evenings. It wasn't a bad setup. I was in community college at the time, taking classes during the day and helping out with bills where I could. Most nights were quiet, just me, my laptop, and whatever noise I made cooking dinner. That Friday night had been normal. I'd reheated leftovers around 6 o'clock, watched a couple shows, and went to bed just after 11:30. Before I shut everything down, I remember checking the front and side doors, locking the deadbolts like I always did. What I didn't check was the garage. It had rained earlier that day, and sometimes the side door that led from the garage into the kitchen would swell from moisture. When that happened, the latch wouldn't fully engage unless you pulled it tight. I vaguely remembered coming in that way earlier when I got home, and I had this nagging feeling later that night that I might not have closed it properly. But by the time I was in bed, I was too tired to care. I woke up just after 3 o'clock. The house was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. I didn't know why I woke up at first. No dreams, no sounds. Just an awful pressure in my chest like something was off. I sat up and looked toward my bedroom door. It was cracked open like always, just wide enough to see the hallway nightlight casting that soft, yellowish glow across the floorboards. That's when I heard it, something downstairs. A soft click, like metal against tile. It could have been the refrigerator kicking on, or maybe the ice machine. I told myself that and pulled the covers back over me, but my ears stayed sharp. I wasn't fully asleep again when I heard it a second time, louder this time. A clink, followed by what sounded like a slow, scraping movement. Not a sound the fridge would make. My heart started picking up. I reached for my phone but realized it was still on the nightstand across the room, charging. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to make any sound that would carry. I held my breath and listened again. A door closed. Not slammed, not forced. Just slowly shut. The soft squeak of hinges, followed by a dull click. It came from the kitchen. I sat completely still, trying to convince myself it could be explained. Maybe the wind pushed something out of place. Maybe the dryer vent shifted again like it had last winter. But the air in the room felt wrong. Charged. Like the moments before a storm hits. I forced myself to move. Slowly, step by step, I crept toward my nightstand and grabbed my phone. The screen lit up the room just enough to make me feel exposed, so I lowered the brightness before opening the camera app and switching it to video. Not to film anything, just to use it like a mirror, letting me see the hallway behind me while I stepped out. I didn't call my dad. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. I think part of me still believed I'd go downstairs and find the cat knocked something over, that it would be embarrassing, that I'd call someone and have to explain that it was nothing, that I was just paranoid because I watched too many crime documentaries. I moved into the hallway, then down the stairs. Each step creaked louder than it should have. I paused at the bottom, peeking around the corner into the kitchen. The light above the sink was on. I never leave that light on. The pantry door stood wide open, even though I remembered closing it earlier. The trash bin was tipped at an angle, and one of the drawers near the oven was slightly pulled out. I took another step forward. That's when I saw it. The door to the garage was ajar. Just barely. Open no more than an inch, but enough to see the darkness beyond it. Enough to see that it hadn't latched. I froze. My phone started to slip in my hand, and I caught it midair before it hit the floor. That motion, as silent as it was, made something shift in the garage. There was a sound, low and soft, like the heel of a boot dragging across concrete. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My whole body felt pinned by that sound, like I was prey, and whatever made that noise had noticed me. I took one slow step back, then another. The moment I reached the bottom step of the staircase, I heard a metallic tap against the tile floor in the kitchen, followed by another, like something being dragged. I turned and moved fast, taking the steps two at a time, my heart hammering in my throat. I reached my room, shut the door quietly but firmly, and locked it. Then I backed away from the door and sat on the floor, gripping my phone like it was the only real thing in the world. I opened the emergency dial screen but didn't press anything. I kept staring at the door, listening. I wanted to hear nothing, but I did hear something. Footsteps. Not fast, not charging, just slow, deliberate steps, moving from the kitchen into the living room, then onto the stairs. I didn't know whether to hide in the closet, or under the bed, or scream. I couldn't decide. Every option felt useless. Then the footsteps stopped. I waited for a knock, a jiggle at the door handle, something. But instead, I heard a whisper, so low I almost missed it. Just a word, or maybe a breath. Right outside my room. I pressed my back to the closet door. My hands were sweating. I stared at the lock, waiting for it to twitch. Then the sound came again. A soft tap, like fingernails brushing wood. Just once. I slid my hand toward the wall socket, trying to unplug my charger to grab the cord. That's when I heard something hit the ground outside my room. Not dropped, placed. Metal on wood. Then silence. I stayed there until the sun came up. When I finally opened the door, there was nothing outside, no one. But on the floor, leaning against the baseboard, was a long, black box cutter, the kind you use for shipping tape. Beside it was a single latex glove, unused. That morning, I checked every door. The garage was unlocked. The outer door, the one that led to the driveway, had been wide open. My dad hadn't come home yet. I waited until he pulled in around 6:45 before saying anything. He looked pale when I told him. Not scared. Angry. He checked the security cameras, but the one in the garage had been unplugged. We called the sheriff's department. 2 deputies came by that afternoon and did a walkthrough. No signs of forced entry. They dusted the box cutter for prints, but didn't find any usable ones. One of them asked if maybe I had imagined the footsteps, maybe had a nightmare. I didn't answer. Nothing was taken, nothing vandalized. There were no broken locks, no shattered windows, no disturbed furniture. Just that door left open, that knife, that sound on the stairs. They told us we should consider upgrading our security. Maybe add motion lights outside or a new door with a better lock. But they didn't say much else, not officially. That night I stayed awake until after 3 o'clock, waiting to hear it again. The click, the scrape, the whisper. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. The following few nights passed without incident, but I couldn't relax. Not really. I started locking my door at night, something I never used to do. I kept my phone on the pillow next to me, brightness turned down, emergency dial open. Every creak in the floor, every wind gust against the window made my chest tighten. My dad changed the locks that weekend. We installed a keypad on the front door, reinforced the deadbolt on the garage, and got a new camera that stored footage on a cloud account instead of just a local drive. I should have felt safer. I didn't. Every time I walked through the kitchen, I glanced at the spot where the box cutter had been. That quiet corner by the baseboard haunted me more than the actual encounter. I didn't tell many people what happened, just one friend from school, and even then, I left out most of the details. It felt unreal, not like a dream exactly, more like something I had no right remembering, like I had opened a door to something that wasn't meant to be witnessed. I knew it sounded paranoid, but I started noticing things in the weeks that followed. Small, subtle things. The motion light in the backyard would trip around 3:30 every few nights. Always the same time. Nothing ever showed up on the camera, at least not clearly. Sometimes the feed would glitch for just a second. The video would freeze, then resume, but always right when the light came on. I tried to tell myself it was just a bug in the system. One night, I came home from a late shift at the grocery store. I parked in the driveway and used the keypad on the front door. As soon as I stepped into the house, I froze. The smell was wrong, not strong, just faint enough to catch if you were paying attention. It smelled like oil, not motor oil, something sharper, industrial, like the kind used to lubricate tools. I walked straight to the kitchen and checked the garage door, still locked. Then I checked every room in the house. The closets, under the sinks, even inside the crawl space hatch near the laundry room. Nothing. I went to bed that night with a kitchen knife under my pillow. It was stupid. I knew it, but I didn't care. The dreams started after that. I'd wake up around 3 o'clock, soaked in sweat, convinced I'd heard someone breathing next to me. One night, I woke up and saw the silhouette of a person standing at the foot of my bed, tall, still, completely silent. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was sleep paralysis, that I was just primed for fear. But something shifted the following week. My dad started working overtime, doubles back to back, and was gone nearly every night. I hated how quiet the house felt. Too many shadows, too much time to think. That Wednesday night, I was sitting on the couch around 9:15, watching something I wasn't really paying attention to. The hallway camera sent a push notification to my phone. Motion detected. That didn't make sense. I was home. I was alone. I opened the app and rewound the feed. The clip was only 4 seconds long. Nothing obvious showed at first, just the hallway from a wide angle. Then a flicker, like something passed by. Not fully visible, more like a distortion. Like someone walked past the camera wearing something highly reflective. But there was no sound, no footsteps, no click of the doors. I shut off the app and went upstairs. I double-checked the front door, the back lock, the windows in the living room. Everything was sealed. I returned to my room and kept the lights on that night. The next morning, I found a smudge on the inside of the living room window. Not outside. Inside. It was faint, shaped like a thumbprint, smudged upward, like someone had pressed it while leaning in. That afternoon, I bought a second deadbolt for my bedroom door. I stopped sleeping properly. I kept the lights dim, barely ate, and found myself compulsively checking the locks every couple hours. I tried staying with a friend over the weekend, but even in their apartment, I kept waking up at exactly 3:13 a.m. No noise, no dreams, just the same pressure in my chest. That horrible charged feeling that something was watching. On Monday, I came home after class to find a single envelope slid under the garage door. No postage, no writing. Inside was a photograph. Black and white, grainy. It showed the side of my house taken at night through the trees. From the angle, it had to be shot from the woods bordering the rear property line. I stared at that photo for a long time before burning it in the kitchen sink. I didn't tell my dad. I didn't call the police. I didn't even know what I'd say anymore. By Thursday, I'd reached a breaking point. I stayed up all night, sitting in the hallway with my back to the wall, holding my phone in one hand and the kitchen knife in the other. I kept the lights off. I didn't move. Just listened. At 3:17 a.m., I heard the back gate creak open. It wasn't loud, just slow, metal hinges bending. I stood up and moved to the living room window. I couldn't see anything. I waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing. Then the back motion light clicked on. I didn't look out again. I walked to the garage, flipped on the camera feed, and saw nothing. The yard was empty. The trees were still. But I heard something in the kitchen. A slow click, then a creak. I turned back toward the hallway and heard the smallest sound behind me. A breath. I whipped around. No one. I locked myself in the bedroom again, called my dad. He answered on the third ring and could tell something was wrong from the way I breathed. I didn't say much, just that I needed him to come home. He did. Took him 15 minutes. We searched the house together. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been forced open. But the back door latch was wedged with something, a folded piece of cardboard, thin enough to barely hold the catch, just enough to keep it from locking. That was the last night I stayed in that house. I moved in with my cousin 2 towns over. I finished school, got my associate's degree, and left the area 6 months later. I haven't seen or heard anything since. But I think about it every time I hear a creak in the hallway. Every time I see a motion light blink for no reason. I think about how easy it would have been for him to wait. Just wait until I fell asleep. Just wait until I forgot to check the garage. Just wait until I left the window unlocked. I think about that box cutter, that latex glove, and I wonder how many nights he stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to me breathe. I was on my way back from my brother's place in the mountains. He'd been helping me with some home repairs that weekend, and I'd stayed longer than I meant to. By the time I packed up my tools and left, it was already past midnight. The drive home was quiet and dull for the first hour, mostly highway and the occasional gas station glowing in the dark like a beacon. But when I hit the tree line outside of Elbridge, everything changed. My GPS had routed me through a narrow stretch of state forest that I wasn't familiar with. I remember hesitating at the turn, debating whether to stick with the main road. But I was tired. I just wanted to get home. The route said it would shave 15 minutes off the drive, so I took it. As soon as I made the turn, I regretted it. The pavement thinned into gravel within a mile, and the tree cover thickened to the point where my headlights barely made a dent. I adjusted my seat and leaned forward, squinting past the wipers as a thin drizzle started tapping on the windshield. There was no shoulder, no visible road markers, and no traffic for what felt like miles. I kept telling myself I'd be back on a paved road in no time. It was around 2 o'clock when I noticed something strange. The forest around me was dead silent. No bugs, no birds, no movement in the trees, just the occasional slap of water against the windshield and the low hum of my engine. I'd been on back roads before, but this was different. The silence felt wrong, like something was waiting. I brushed it off as nerves and kept driving, trying not to look at the trees too long. They seemed to close in the deeper I went. Then I saw it. Just ahead, maybe 40 feet down the road, there was a truck stopped sideways, blocking most of the path. It looked old. A dark, boxy model with faded paint and a busted headlight. No running lights. No hazard blinkers. Just sitting there in the middle of the road like it had died on the spot. My first instinct was that someone had broken down. But something about it felt off. The cab door on the driver's side was wide open. No one was inside. I slowed to a crawl and flicked on my high beams, scanning the road and the surrounding trees. The forest was still. The only sound came from the soft crunch of gravel beneath my tires as I edged closer. There were no skid marks, no sign of impact, no flicker of movement, Just that truck sitting there, angled awkwardly, like it had been abandoned in a hurry. I considered backing up, maybe finding another route, but I didn't have a signal. My phone had lost reception 20 minutes earlier. I stopped about 15 feet away and put the car in park. I didn't get out. I just sat there, staring at the open door, waiting for someone to step out. Nothing happened. I looked behind me, then back toward the truck. That's when I noticed something that still makes my stomach turn. The dirt on the sides of the road had been disturbed. Not just tracks from tires. There were drag marks, deep and messy, like someone had pulled something heavy out of the passenger side and into the woods. The marks disappeared into the underbrush. My throat tightened. I reached for my phone again, but it still showed 0 bars. I thought about honking, but I didn't want to draw attention. I was about to throw the car in reverse and back away when I caught movement in the corner of my mirror. A shape, low to the ground. I turned slowly, and for a second I didn't see anything. Then the shape shifted again. It was a man, crouching, maybe 20 feet behind my car, moving low between the trees. I felt my chest lock up. Before I could react, I saw another one. This one closer, maybe 10 feet off the shoulder on the opposite side. Also crouched, also moving low. They weren't walking toward me, they were flanking me. Both of them closing in on my car from behind, creeping slowly, step by step. Neither had flashlights, neither made a sound. I panicked. I slammed the gear into drive and hit the gas. My tires skidded for a split second before catching, and the car lurched forward. As I passed the abandoned truck, I noticed a third figure crouched behind the cab. I barely missed clipping him. He scrambled backward just as I swerved around the front end, my mirror nearly catching on the corner of the bumper. The whole thing happened so fast I couldn't even process it. I just kept my foot down and drove. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove through that forest with white knuckles and a dry mouth, blinking sweat out of my eyes and praying I wouldn't hit a dead end. The road twisted and narrowed, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. My mind kept replaying those crouched shapes moving toward my car in silence. There was no mistaking their intent. They weren't trying to help. They weren't stranded. They were waiting. It took maybe 10 more minutes before I finally saw a street sign and the faint glow of a porch light in the distance. I didn't even care where I was. I just kept driving until I hit pavement again and then pulled off at a diner near the highway. I sat in the parking lot for nearly half an hour, trying to catch my breath, hands still shaking as I held my phone. When the signal came back, I called my brother. He answered on the second ring. I didn't tell him everything, just that I took a bad turn and needed to calm down before I got back on the road. I never told anyone the full story, not even him. Every time I think about what could have happened if I'd hesitated, if I'd opened my door or gotten out to check the truck, my skin crawls. That whole setup was a trap. There's no doubt in my mind. I wasn't supposed to see them. Not until it was too late. Whatever they were planning, they were ready. They had positions, they had timing, and they knew how to move without making a sound. For weeks after that, I kept checking the news. I looked for reports of arrests or disappearances in that area. Nothing ever came up. No missing persons, no broken down truck, nothing. Like it had all been erased. I even drove out to that part of the state again months later during daylight, hoping I could find that road again. I never did. Not exactly. The forest had dozens of offshoots and logging paths, and none of them looked quite right. It was like the place had swallowed itself. I still don't know what those men were planning. Maybe they just wanted a car. Maybe they wanted more. But the way they moved, quiet, deliberate, practiced, I don't think it was their first time. I think they'd done it before. I think they'd set up that trap more than once. And I think one of those times, whoever stopped didn't get away. I didn't realize how much that night had affected me until about a week later. I was back home, trying to return to normal, but everything felt slightly off. I couldn't explain it to anyone without sounding paranoid. I kept checking the locks 3 or 4 times before bed. I started keeping my phone charged at all times, even when I wasn't leaving the house. Every small noise outside made me freeze, even if it was just wind in the hedges or the neighbor's dog barking. My sleep got lighter. I'd wake up 2 or 3 times a night, heart pounding, for no reason I could identify. The thing that really started to wear on me wasn't the memory of what I saw. It was the idea that maybe I hadn't seen everything. Maybe those 3 weren't the only ones. Maybe I'd only caught the tail end of something bigger. I kept replaying the position of the truck, the way it was angled, the open door. It didn't feel like a coincidence. It was staged. They wanted someone to stop. They were ready. That meant they had time, which meant they weren't just driving around looking for targets. They were hunting in a specific place. And I just happened to be the one who came down that road. A few days later, I decided to report it. Not to the local police where I lived. They wouldn't have jurisdiction. I looked up the sheriff's office for the county near Elbridge and gave them a call. I kept it simple. I told them I saw a broken down vehicle and some suspicious activity in the woods. I didn't mention the men creeping up on my car. I just said I thought it might be a setup for car theft. The deputy I spoke with was polite, but he didn't ask for many details. He told me they'd take a look and thanked me for calling. That was it. I expected to feel some relief after that. I didn't. If anything, it made me more uneasy. The way he brushed it off felt too casual. Either this kind of thing happened more often than I realized, or he didn't believe me at all. I tried to put it behind me after that, but the tension didn't go away. I found myself scanning the road every time I drove at night, especially in rural areas. I started avoiding shortcuts altogether. If it wasn't lit and paved, I wasn't taking it. I also started paying closer attention to the cars around me. I wrote down license plates. I noticed when a car had mismatched panels or fresh dents. It sounds extreme, but once you've seen people waiting in the woods like that, it changes how you look at strangers. 2 weeks went by. I was doing better, sleeping more consistently, not feeling quite as paranoid. But then something happened that shook me again. I was pulling into my driveway after work, and I noticed a sheet of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was a flyer, maybe some local ad or lost pet notice. But when I pulled it off and unfolded it, I felt cold all over. It was blank, just a plain piece of printer paper. No ink, no message, just folded once and slipped under the wiper. That might not sound like much, but it was the way it was placed. It hadn't been blown there by wind. It was too deliberate. Someone had walked up to my car in broad daylight while it was parked in my driveway and left it there without me noticing. My neighborhood wasn't busy. It wasn't the kind of place where people passed by on foot. If someone came to my house, they had a reason. I looked around, checked the hedges and both sides of the street. Nothing out of place. I went inside and locked the door. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the folded paper, what it meant, why it was blank, whether someone had followed me home that night from the forest without me realizing. It could have been a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. The next morning, I checked the security camera mounted above my garage. I'd had it installed years ago after a string of package thefts in the area. It only stored footage for 72 hours, unless I manually saved it. I pulled up the previous day's file and fast-forwarded through the late afternoon. I watched myself pull in. A few cars drove by, nothing unusual. Then, just before 5 o'clock, the feed skipped, just for a second, maybe 2 seconds. When it came back, the paper was on my windshield. I replayed it 3 times. The feed stuttered each time, always at the exact same frame. There was no indication of interference, no glitching in the video before or after. Just that missing second. Like someone had timed it perfectly. Or worse, like someone had tampered with the system itself. I checked the settings, made sure the files were still being stored locally. Everything seemed normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had left that paper wanted me to know I'd been seen, that they'd been close. I backed the video up to the day before just to be safe. And that's when I noticed something else. At around 2:30 in the morning, the camera caught a car passing by. A dark pickup. Same shape as the one I'd seen in the woods. Same busted headlight. It didn't stop. It just cruised past slowly and kept going. I zoomed in, tried to make out the plates, but the image was too grainy. Still, I knew. It wasn't just a similar truck. It was the same one. That confirmed it for me. This wasn't random. I hadn't stumbled into something. I'd been watched, followed, marked maybe. Whatever happened on that road hadn't ended when I drove away. It followed me home. I started carrying a knife in my jacket. I added motion lights to the backyard. I stopped going out after dark unless I had to. Every car that passed my house, every knock at the door, every flicker of movement near the windows. It all felt like part of something closing in. 2 nights later, I was woken by a loud thump. I checked the time. It was just after 3 o'clock. My first thought was that something had fallen off a shelf. But when I got up and looked around, everything was where it should be. I stood in the hallway, listening. Nothing. Then I heard it again. A dull, heavy knock. This time from the side of the house near the kitchen. I crept over and peeked through the blinds. There was no one there, but the gate to the backyard was wide open. I stood there for almost a minute, barely breathing. Then I reached for the knife I kept in the drawer and moved toward the back door. I didn't open it. I just flipped the deadbolt and checked the handle. It was locked. The motion light didn't come on. I stepped back and turned on every light in the house. I didn't care if it made me look paranoid. I wanted whoever was out there to know I was awake. I called the local police and reported a prowler. They sent a cruiser by, but by the time the officer arrived, there was nothing to see. No footprints, no forced entry. He said it might have been an animal. I didn't argue. I just thanked him and waited for him to leave before checking every inch of the house again. The next morning, I found a muddy smudge on the kitchen window. It was faint, but it was definitely from a hand. Just a few fingers angled downward, as if someone had leaned in to look. I was done pretending it was all in my head. I took the next day off work and drove to a hardware store 2 towns over. I bought a second camera for the backyard and upgraded the front system to one with remote access. I changed the locks. I added a second deadbolt to the back door. I even bought a can of spray chalk, the kind you use to mark construction lines, and covered the entire area around the house in a thin, even coat. That way, if someone walked through it at night, I'd see it. For a while, nothing happened. The cameras were quiet, the lights didn't trip. I started to relax again, just a little. Maybe whoever it was had moved on. Maybe the attention had faded. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The fear was still there. It just got quieter, and that made it worse. Because when the next thing happened, it wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious. It was subtle, almost clever. I came home one evening and found my garage door slightly open. Just a few inches, enough to notice. I always shut it completely. I stood there in the driveway for a long time, just staring at it. Then I backed away, drove around the block, and called a neighbor I trusted. He came over with his dog and checked the garage while I waited by the curb. Nothing had been taken. Nothing was out of place. But that didn't mean much. I was more disturbed by what hadn't happened. Whoever opened it didn't want to break in. They wanted to show me they could. After the garage incident, I started sleeping in shifts. A few hours in the early evening, then another stretch just before dawn. I kept the lights on in every room. The front porch stayed lit through the night. I parked with the back of my car against the house so no one could approach it without stepping into the camera's field of view. I knew I couldn't live like that forever, but I also knew that pretending it was over would be worse. The next few nights were quiet. Too quiet, no movement on the cameras, no odd sounds, nothing missing or moved. But it didn't feel like peace. It felt like patience, like whatever was out there had pulled back, just enough to let the tension build. I stopped checking the news. There was nothing to find. I'd already looked into every cold case and roadside incident I could find in the Tri-County area. No reports of similar setups, no missing persons from that date. If what I'd witnessed was part of something larger, it had gone unnoticed, or it had been covered up. One morning, I found a small pile of gravel near my front door. Not dumped, arranged. Just a small cone of stones stacked in a neat triangle shape, right where I would see it as I stepped outside. I didn't touch it. I photographed it from every angle, then used gloves to sweep it into a bucket. I checked the camera footage from the night before. It didn't show anything. No motion triggers, no gap in the feed, nothing. I tried to tell myself it could have been a prank. But who does that? Who drives into a quiet neighborhood in the middle of the night, bypasses lights, ignores cameras, and leaves a small, silent message like that? The following week, I came home to find a strip of masking tape across the threshold of my back door. Just one piece, maybe 5 inches long, not torn from anything, just pressed flat between the door and the frame, low near the baseboard. I only noticed it because I felt the resistance when I opened the door. That was the point. It wasn't meant to block me. It was meant to tell them whether I'd been inside. I stared at it for a long time before stepping back outside and locking the door again. Someone had marked my home like it was part of a route. That night, I stayed in my car until sunrise, parked 2 blocks away, watching the house through a gap between fences. Nothing moved, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't losing sleep over shadows or dreams. Whoever was behind this was real. And they were disciplined. They didn't vandalize, they didn't make noise, they didn't leave fingerprints. They left silence. Emptiness. Bare traces of their presence, always just enough to make me wonder if I'd missed something worse. I started keeping a written log. Dates, times, every irregularity I could remember. I mapped it out, trying to find a pattern. There wasn't one. The events didn't follow a rhythm. Some happened days apart, others were weeks. Sometimes 2 would happen back to back, then nothing for a month. But every incident shared one thing. None of them could be easily explained. None of them were mistakes. They all seemed like steps, preparations for something, or maybe tests. I kept thinking about that truck, about the crouched men in the woods. I knew they hadn't just picked that spot at random. It was chosen. Remote enough to delay help, but close enough to populated roads for bait to work. That meant they knew the area, and if they knew the forest, they probably knew the people. That's what made the blank sheet of paper feel more sinister. Not just a message, but a demonstration, a way of saying they could find me wherever I went. I eventually gave in and called a private investigator, a retired cop, quiet reputation, former missing persons unit. I gave him a watered-down version of the story, left out the surveillance, left out the tape and gravel, just said I'd seen a suspicious setup on a rural road and thought I'd been followed. I wanted to know if anything like it had happened before. He was skeptical at first, but agreed to dig around. Said he'd call in a week. He didn't. When I called back, his office line rang to voicemail. I tried again 2 days later, still nothing. I finally drove out to the address listed on his card. His office was closed. The blinds were drawn. Mail was stacked inside the door. A neighbor told me he hadn't shown up that week. I didn't press further. I just thanked them and left. That was the last time I tried asking for help. What came next was the worst. It wasn't a break-in. It wasn't a noise in the dark. It was something so quiet, so strange that I still have trouble believing it happened. I woke up one morning and walked into the kitchen. Everything looked normal until I opened the refrigerator. Sitting inside, on the top shelf, was a Polaroid photo. No note, no message, just the photo. It was a picture of my backyard, taken at night from inside the fence line. You could see the back porch light glowing in the distance. The timestamp on the bottom corner had no date, just the time, 4:12 a.m. My hands went numb holding it. I looked at the camera feed from the night before. Nothing had triggered the sensor. No figure, no flash, no distortion. But the photo was real. The grain, the flash reflection, even the angle. All of it proved someone had been there. Not just in the yard, inside the perimeter. Inside the barrier I thought I'd built. And then they entered the house, opened my refrigerator, left a picture of themselves, and walked out again without leaving a trace. That broke me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sit down. I paced the house until the sky turned blue. Every window stayed locked. Every door was double-checked. But it didn't matter. They'd already been inside. They could come back whenever they wanted, and I wouldn't know until they wanted me to. I took the next few days off work. I told them I had a family emergency. I didn't leave the house except for food. I shut off every unnecessary light and kept the curtains drawn. But I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I started considering leaving town, changing states, renting a storage unit for my things, and moving in with a cousin. But that would only work if I could get out clean, if they weren't already watching me when I packed. And then, 2 nights before I made the decision to leave, something changed. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning to the sound of my doorbell. Not a knock, not a break-in, just the soft, mechanical chime echoing through the hall. I sat up, heart pounding. The porch light was already on. I crept toward the front window and peered through the blinds. There was no one there, but the motion camera had activated. I checked the feed, hands shaking. The recording showed the porch a few seconds before the chime, empty. Then, just after the sound, the lights flickered. And when they came back on, there was something on the welcome mat. A package. Small, wrapped in brown paper, no label, just sitting there like it had been placed gently. I waited until morning. The sun was already high when I finally opened the door and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. Inside was a VHS tape. No markings, no case, just the tape. I didn't own a VHS player. I hadn't for years. I drove 30 miles to a pawn shop and bought the cheapest one they had. When I got back, I hooked it up in the basement where the blinds were always closed. I closed the door behind me, locked it, and turned on the screen. The footage was grainy, low resolution. It showed a single room, bare floor, 1 chair, cement walls. A man sat in the chair, hands bound, head lowered. You couldn't see his face clearly, but I recognized the shirt. It was the private investigator. He didn't move, he didn't speak. He just sat there. The camera zoomed slightly, then cut to black. No sound, no explanation. I turned off the television and sat there for a long time. My ears rang with silence. I put the tape back in the box, wrapped it twice, and buried it in the back of my closet. I never showed it to anyone. That was 6 months ago. Nothing has happened since. No more signs, no packages, no noises, no photos. The cameras still work. The locks still hold. But I can't shake the feeling that none of it is over. They didn't stop because they were done. They stopped because they proved what they wanted, that they could reach me, that they could leave, and that I wouldn't stop them. I don't take back roads anymore. I don't drive past midnight. I don't trust dead ends. Every shortcut I pass, I wonder if there's another truck parked just out of sight. Another door left open. Another man crouched just beyond the edge of the tree line, watching, waiting for someone to stop. I was 11 when we moved into the house on Merrick Hill. It was a tired-looking place at the edge of a cul-de-sac, with cracked steps, rotting siding, and a basement that reeked of standing water and something worse. It was the first house my mom could afford after the divorce. She was proud of it. I just remember staring down those basement steps on the first day and thinking, I don't want to live here. The stairs led to a sunken living area with a cold tile floor, a low ceiling, and one flickering bulb at the center. The far wall had an alcove built into the concrete, probably meant for storage. but it was deep and unlit like a mouth. There was a rusty floor drain near the center of the room. I remember standing over it, wondering why it smelled like something had died inside. My new bedroom was down there, tucked behind a thin wooden door that didn't quite shut all the way. I didn't complain. I knew money was tight, and Mom was trying her best. But that first night, something about the air in the basement made it hard to sleep. It was too still, like the air had weight. I thought maybe the heater was broken, but I'd later learn there wasn't a heater vent in that room at all. The warmth from upstairs never reached me. Even in late spring, I'd wake up shivering. One of the only things I brought with me when we moved was an old marionette I'd found at a garage sale the year before. I had begged Mom to buy it. It wasn't anything fancy, just a carved wooden puppet with chipped paint and heavy eyelids that always looked half closed. It wore a little cloth coat and had shoes with real laces. I used to think it looked funny. When I pulled the strings, its legs would flail and its head would jerk around like it was irritated. I used to think that was hilarious. I named it Nicholas, after the street we used to live on. For a while, he came everywhere with me, but sometime between the move and my first few weeks in that basement, I forgot about him. He ended up sitting on a shelf above my bed, legs dangling off the edge, collecting dust. The first strange thing happened 2 nights after we moved in. I had just gotten into bed when I heard a dragging sound from the alcove wall. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like a shoe being pulled across wet concrete. I sat up and listened. The sound stopped. I got out of bed and turned on my flashlight. Nothing was there, just the bare concrete walls and that mouth-like alcove across from my room. I told myself it was the old pipes. I went back to bed. The next night, the dragging sound came back. This time it was followed by a soft knock, just once, like someone tapping the concrete. I held my breath. There was no wind in that basement, no windows, no vents. It was too quiet for knocks. By the third night, I'd stopped sleeping properly. Every creak of the ceiling above me made my stomach tighten. I started noticing things out of place in my room. Small things at first. A book moved. A blanket pulled off the bed. A pencil on the floor that I didn't remember dropping. But I was a kid. I assumed I was misremembering. I didn't tell my mom. She was already overwhelmed with work and bills. I didn't want to add to her stress. One night, I came home from school to find Nicholas on the floor, lying face down beside my door. His strings were tangled, and one of his wooden feet was cracked. I didn't remember moving him. I told myself the shelf must have collapsed, but when I looked, the shelf was fine. Everything else was still in place. Just Nicholas had fallen. I put him back, though I faced him toward the wall this time. Something about his half-lidded eyes was starting to make me uneasy. Things got worse slowly. That was the hard part. It wasn't one big event that made me realize something was wrong. It was the steady buildup. Every night the knocking got louder, the dragging sounds closer, the air thicker. I started sleeping with a flashlight under my pillow and my shoes on. I don't know why. I just knew I didn't want to be caught off guard. One Saturday, Mom asked me to do laundry. The washing machine was down in the far corner of the basement, past the alcove and behind a half-rotted curtain that used to be a door. I'd avoided that part of the basement as much as I could, but that day, I didn't have a choice. I held my breath, pulled back the curtain, and stepped inside. It smelled awful, like mildew and metal. I loaded the machine and turned it on, then backed out as fast as I could. As I turned, I thought I saw something move in the alcove. Just a flicker of motion, a shape ducking out of view. But when I looked directly, there was nothing there. Only a broken shelving unit and a collapsed cardboard box. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't want to sound paranoid. That night, I woke to a strange sensation, a weight on my chest. It wasn't heavy, but it pressed down in a way that made it hard to breathe. My eyes shot open. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then I noticed my flashlight had rolled onto the floor, its beam pointing up at the ceiling. As I reached for it, I heard a noise right next to my ear. A tiny creaking, like wood under pressure. I turned my head. Nicholas was lying across my chest, face down, his tangled strings dragging across my skin. I screamed, loud enough for my throat to burn. I threw the puppet across the room and scrambled out of bed. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat on the top step of the basement staircase, blanket wrapped around me, waiting for the sun to come up. When Mom found me, I lied and said I had a nightmare. She ruffled my hair and told me I should stop watching scary shows. I hadn't watched any. I tried to get rid of Nicholas the next day. I took him out to the trash and buried him deep in the bin under a broken lamp and a stack of old magazines. I made sure he was wedged at the bottom. I went back inside and tried to forget about it. But that night, he was back on the shelf above my bed. Same tangled strings, same half-closed eyes. I didn't tell anyone. I started sleeping upstairs, first on the couch, then on the floor of the hallway outside Mom's room. She started getting frustrated, told me I was too old to act like this, that it was just an old house making noise. But the sounds didn't come from the walls. They came from inside the room, from the floor, from the space under the shelf where Nicholas sat. A week later, I stayed late at the library after school. I didn't want to go home. I read books about houses, basements, hauntings. None of it helped. It only made me more anxious. I started hearing the dragging sound in my dreams. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, convinced someone was pulling themselves across the basement floor. Always just out of sight. Always stopping when I looked. One evening, I came home and found my bedroom door shut. That was strange. It never shut properly. I reached out and pushed it open. Inside, the light bulb was swinging, slowly, back and forth, like someone had just bumped it. Nicholas was on the bed, sitting upright, with his strings neatly coiled at his feet. His arms were extended outward, as if waiting to be held. I backed out of the room and shut the door. That night, I slept in the bathtub with a towel over my head. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday. The power had gone out earlier in the evening and Mom was out late at work. I was home alone, reading by flashlight. I had locked the basement door at the top of the stairs, just in case. Around 9 o'clock, I heard something knock. Not once, not twice, but over and over. A soft, rapid tapping, like fingers on wood. I stood frozen in the kitchen, heart pounding. The tapping stopped. Then something began dragging itself up the stairs. I couldn't breathe. I ran to the front door, yanked it open, and bolted into the rain barefoot. I stayed outside until Mom got home. She was furious, told me I was being ridiculous. I didn't care. I refused to go back down there. I slept in her room for the next week, and every night I heard those same dragging sounds beneath the floorboards. But at least there was a door between us. She finally agreed to let me move my bed into the den upstairs. I never went into the basement again. We lived in that house for another year before we moved across town. I never saw Nicholas again, but I never forgot the feeling of his tiny weight on my chest, or the way his strings seemed to tangle themselves in my blankets, or how his shoes left faint scuff marks on the tile, even when I swore I hadn't moved him. We didn't talk about the basement after we moved, not once. I think my mom assumed it had all been in my head, that maybe I had outgrown whatever phase she thought I'd been going through. But I hadn't outgrown anything. I had just learned to keep quiet about the things no one else believed. The new house was smaller, but it was bright, and every room had a window. I was almost 12 by then, and for the first time in what felt like years, I started to feel normal again. My grades came back up, I made friends at school, and I even joined the after-school computer club. Life felt like it was leveling out. I could almost convince myself the basement had just been an overactive imagination mixed with stress and isolation. Then one afternoon in early fall, I came home and found a large cardboard box on my bed. It was sealed with heavy tape, marked in black permanent marker. Bedroom stuff. My mom said she'd finally picked it up from the old storage unit. I didn't remember packing a box like that. She said it had my old books and toys in it. I didn't think much of it at first. I just slid it under my bed and figured I'd sort through it over the weekend. That night, I woke up to the sound of something shifting under the bed. It was slow, a soft scrape against the floorboards. I froze. The house was silent otherwise. No wind, no creaking. Just the faint, dragging movement below me. I told myself it was the box sliding on its own. Maybe the floor wasn't level, but when I leaned over the side of the bed to look, the box was exactly where I'd left it, still taped shut. I stayed up the rest of the night, eyes fixed on that box. When the sun came up, I dragged it out and took it into the backyard. I sat on the back steps with a box cutter in one hand and a knot in my stomach. I sliced through the tape, peeled the flaps open, and looked inside. There were a few paperbacks, some old drawings, a baseball glove, and at the very bottom, tucked between a worn-out blanket and a bundle of tangled cords, was Nicholas. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at him. His coat looked newer. His eyes were still half-lidded, but there was no dust, no signs of age. He looked untouched, like I'd never thrown him away, like he'd never left. My hands were shaking as I reached in and lifted him out. The strings were knotted, but not in a way that made sense. They were wrapped around his legs and torso, tied in tight loops, almost like someone had been trying to keep him still. I dropped him. The sound of his wooden body hitting the pavement echoed louder than it should have. I picked up the box, shoved him back inside, and carried it out to the curb. Trash day wasn't for 3 more days. But I didn't care. I didn't say anything to my mom, just told her the stuff in the box was ruined. She didn't ask questions. That night, I double-checked the locks on every door and window before going to bed. I shoved a towel into the gap under my door and turned on the desk lamp next to my bed. I stayed awake until after 2 o'clock. Everything was silent. I finally let myself drift off. Around 4 o'clock, I woke up gasping. My chest hurt, like something had been sitting on me. The lamp was off. The towel under the door was gone. I sat up and looked around. At the foot of my bed, in the weak light coming through the blinds, I saw the outline of Nicholas. He was propped up against the dresser, strings tangled around his neck, staring straight at me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just lay back down and pulled the blanket over my head, heart pounding so hard it made my teeth hurt. In the morning, he was gone. So was the box on the curb. My mom said the trash collectors must have come early. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But I knew better. I knew the difference between something that had been discarded and something that came back on its own. Over the next few months, Nicholas would reappear. Never in the same spot. Sometimes on the bookshelf, sometimes on the stairs. Once, he was sitting on the bathroom counter, strings coiled neatly beside the sink. I stopped telling anyone. I knew what would happen if I brought it up. They'd smile politely, nod, and then tell me it was probably just stress or a dream or a cry for attention. I didn't want pity. I wanted him gone. One afternoon, I decided to bury him. I waited until my mom was out running errands. I grabbed Nicholas, wrapped him in an old pillowcase, and took him into the woods behind our neighborhood. I didn't go far, just deep enough to be out of sight. I dug a shallow hole with my hands and shoved him in, covering him with dirt and leaves. I marked the spot with a rock and went home without looking back. That night, I slept without waking. For the first time in weeks. I thought maybe it had worked. But when I opened my closet the next morning to grab my school uniform, he was sitting on the top shelf. Pillowcase still tied around his legs. Dirt smudged across his face. I stood there for almost a minute, just staring at him. Then I closed the closet door and left the house without changing. I skipped school and walked for hours. Something had changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something colder. He wasn't following me. He was waiting, watching, like he wanted me to make the next move. like whatever game he was playing wasn't over. A week later, I came home from school to find my bedroom door open, even though I'd locked it that morning. Inside, Nicholas was sitting on my bed. But something was different. His mouth, a carved slit that had always stayed shut, was open. Just slightly, like someone had tried to force it, or like he was trying to say something. There were scratch marks around the mouth seam, tiny grooves like fingernails or the tip of a penknife. My stomach turned. I picked him up, marched him out to the garage, and locked him inside an old wooden chest. I stacked boxes on top, heavy ones. I even wedged the chest under a shelving unit. Then I left it. I didn't go back into the garage for the rest of the year. I avoided it completely. If I needed my bike, I took the back gate instead. If Mom asked me to grab something from storage, I'd pretend I couldn't find it. She chalked it up to teenage laziness. I let her. We moved again the following summer. I didn't touch the chest. I didn't check to see if he was still in there. I didn't want to know. We left it behind with a bunch of other junk. The new place was smaller again, but it had no basement, no attic, just a single floor and big windows. I started to feel normal again. By the time I was 17, I was living with my aunt in a different city altogether. Things between me and my mom had gotten tense. She said I had too many walls, that I never opened up. I didn't know how to explain that if I did. The only thing behind those walls was something no one wanted to hear. My aunt was easygoing. She gave me space. I was working part-time and taking community college classes. My room had a lock on the door and a sliding window that overlooked the neighbor's yard. I felt safe. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd last seen Nicholas. I'd almost convinced myself it was over, that maybe I'd been right all along, that maybe it had just been my imagination. Then one afternoon, I came home to find a package on my bed. No label, no return address, just a plain cardboard box sealed with red tape. My stomach dropped. I didn't move for almost a full minute. Then I picked up the box and walked it outside. I dumped it in the metal trash barrel behind the shed and set it on fire. The flames took a while to catch, but once they did, the box burned fast. I stayed out there until nothing was left but ash and a warped scrap of melted string. That night, I locked my door, pulled the blinds, and slept with the lights on. 3 days later, I found a single shoe on my dresser. A tiny, worn black shoe with a real lace. Inside, in white paint, were the first 2 letters of my last name. I hadn't told anyone about that. Not even my aunt. I didn't scream. I just picked it up, carried it outside, and threw it into the sewer drain. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. On the 3rd night, I moved a dresser in front of my door and shoved a chair under the knob. Then I lay in bed with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of something dragging across the floor. It never came, but the silence felt worse, like a calm that wasn't really calm, just a pause, a waiting breath. I knew it wasn't over. I knew he wasn't gone. I just didn't know what he wanted. I still don't. I was 24 when I finally told someone. Not a therapist, not a family member, just a girl I had been seeing for a few months. Her name was Marla. She had a strange sense of humor and a deep interest in odd things. Missing persons, cults, abandoned asylums, that kind of thing. We were sitting on her porch late one night talking about childhood fears, and before I realized it, I had told her everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't act like I was crazy. She just listened. At the end, she asked if I still had him. I said no. She said she wanted to see the house. The first one. The one with the basement. I hadn't been back since we left, but for reasons I couldn't explain, I agreed. I told her we'd drive out the following weekend. It was a 6-hour trip. The entire drive felt wrong, like the kind of wrong you don't notice at first. A background hum just loud enough to keep you tense. We didn't talk much. When we finally pulled up to the house on Merrick Hill, I almost didn't recognize it. The siding had been redone, and there was a swing set in the front yard. It looked normal, lived in. like whatever darkness had once lived there had moved on, or at least gone quiet. I didn't expect the current owners to be home, but the driveway was empty and the lights were off. The house looked asleep. We sat in the car for a while. Then Marla said she wanted to see the backyard. I told her there wasn't much to see. She went anyway. I followed. Around the back, the grass had grown long and uneven. The sliding door to the basement was gone, replaced with a new one. Glass panes frosted over so you couldn't see in. She walked up to the door and pressed her hand against it. Then she looked back at me. Her voice was soft when she asked if I remembered the alcove. I nodded. She said she thought that was where he had come from. I asked what she meant. She didn't answer. She just turned around and started walking back toward the car. That night, we stayed at a motel 2 towns over. I had trouble sleeping. The hallway outside our room creaked whenever anyone walked by, and there was a strange mechanical hum coming from the soda machine. Around 3 o'clock, I woke up to find Marla sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I asked if she was okay. She said she was just thinking. She sounded far away. I asked what about. She didn't respond. Just got up and went to the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. When I woke up in the morning, she was gone. Her bag was still there, but her car keys were missing. I called her phone. No answer. I waited until checkout time, then drove around town, checking every gas station and diner. Nothing. I even filed a missing person report, but they told me she was an adult, and unless I had reason to believe she was in danger, there wasn't much they could do. I drove back to the house. This time, there was a car in the driveway. A white van with a bumper sticker for a local church. I didn't go to the door. I just sat in my car, staring at the frosted glass of the basement entrance. At one point, a woman opened the front door and stood there looking at me. She didn't say anything. After a moment, she closed the door again. I never saw Marla again. I tried to move on. I got a new job, a new apartment, and eventually started seeing someone else. But I never stopped locking my closet. I never stopped checking under the bed. I never stopped waking up at night and listening for that soft, dragging sound. Then one day, I came home from work to find a small package waiting on my doorstep. Brown paper. No address, just my name written in black ink. My hands were shaking before I even touched it. I knew what was inside. I knew before I opened it. I brought it into the kitchen, set it on the counter, and stared at it for a long time. Then I got a knife and cut the paper away. Inside was a shoe. Small, black, with a real lace. I turned it over. Inside the heel, in faded white paint, were the first 2 letters of my last name. The same scuffed edge, the same faint crease near the toe. It was his. I didn't scream. I just set it down, went outside, and sat on the curb until the streetlights came on. I didn't bring the shoe back inside. I left it in the kitchen and stayed with a friend for a few days. When I returned, it was gone. But the next night, I woke up to find the closet door cracked open, just enough to see the edge of something wooden peeking out from behind my winter coat. I closed the door. I didn't open it again for 3 days. When I finally did, there was nothing inside. But the coat had moved. It continued like that for months. Small things, subtle, a string on the carpet, a knock on the wall, a whisper of movement in the dark. He never showed himself fully again. But I knew he was there, waiting, always just beyond the corner of my vision, always watching, always remembering. By the time I turned 30, I had accepted that he was a part of my life now, like a scar, like an old injury that aches when the weather changes. I stopped fighting it. I just made rules. No toys in the house, no second-hand boxes, no mirrors in the bedroom. I stopped sleeping on my back. I never left the closet open, not even a crack. I got married. We bought a house near the coast, a 1-story open layout. No basement, no attic, no crawl space. I didn't tell my wife about Nicholas. I didn't want to bring him into our life. But part of me wondered if he had already followed, if he had ever really stayed behind. One night, my wife was cleaning out the hall closet when she found a box labeled tools. She brought it into the kitchen and asked if it was mine. I told her I didn't recognize it. She opened it anyway. Inside was a tangle of cords, some nails, and a small wooden hand. Just the hand. Pale, with a chipped thumb and 2 tiny holes at the wrist where a string might go. She asked what it was from. I told her it must have been a Halloween decoration. We threw it out together. She didn't press the issue, but that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept feeling something brushing my foot through the blanket. Every time I moved, it stopped. Every time I closed my eyes, it started again. A soft tug, like a string being pulled. The next morning, I went outside to get the mail. In the center of the driveway was a perfect circle of dirt. Not wide, maybe 2 feet across, but too round to be natural. There were no tracks, no tools nearby, just a mound of soil. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it until the mailman honked his horn and snapped me out of it. That night, I woke up to find the bedroom door open. We always locked it. Always. I got out of bed, heart racing, and checked the hallway. Nothing. I turned on every light in the house and checked every room. Nothing. But when I came back to bed, there was a small piece of cloth on my pillow. Faded blue. Torn at the edge. I recognized it. It was from the coat Nicholas had worn. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room until the sun came up. My wife found me there in the morning and asked if everything was okay. I lied. I said I'd had a headache. She didn't believe me, but she didn't press. Weeks went by, then months. The activity slowed. No more cloth scraps, no more circles, no more knocking, just silence. I began to hope that maybe he had grown bored, that maybe he was finally gone. But hope is a dangerous thing. Last winter, we had a son. He's almost a year old now. Bright-eyed, always smiling, always curious. A few nights ago, I was putting him to bed when he reached up and pointed at the closet. It was shut. There was nothing unusual about it, but he kept pointing. Then he said a word I didn't recognize, not quite clear, like a name spoken through water. I asked him to say it again. He just giggled and reached for his blanket. That night, I had a dream. I was back in the basement, same tile floor, same flickering bulb, same alcove in the wall. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was standing there, grown, staring into the darkness, and from the shadows, a voice whispered something. Not words, just a low gurgling sound. Then a shape emerged. Wooden limbs, tattered cloth, and a string dragging across the floor like a fuse waiting to be lit. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The closet door was open, just an inch. I got up and shut it, locked it. Then I checked on my son. He was asleep. But in his crib, tucked beneath his blanket, was a black shoe, tiny, worn, with a white mark painted on the heel. I took it outside, dug a hole near the tree line, and buried it. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't call anyone. I just sat on the porch for hours, listening, waiting, because I know this isn't over. Not for me, not for my son. Nicholas wasn't just a puppet. He wasn't a toy, he was something else. Something that wears the skin of childhood, that feeds on the space between memory and fear. And he remembers me. He always will.
Hmm.